He was told to take his things and leave. The boy did not object, because he thought the one who had said it was the only one who could save the world. He thanked Aries for his concern, hoping that he would do his best to save the world. And it was for a reason, for Aries was a hero. However, would he be able to cope without his support? Last night, former adventurer Slad Meisty was expelled from the heroes group. He was originally asked to join the group by an old friend. By staying there and keeping his skills a secret, he thought he could help. But that wasn't the issue. The problem was money for the journey home and for food. There wasn't any at all. You can't do nothing for nothing, or everything will be taken away from you. He reasoned that this could be considered a hero's gift and accepted his current situation. He should have gotten a job. The Adventurers Guild was dedicated to gathering medicinal herbs and materials, as well as killing monsters. His attention was drawn to a woman who was having trouble carrying groceries. Slad couldn't help but give her some support. The woman felt uncomfortable as her back was failing her due to her age. Suddenly, she felt something strange. She felt better. She felt lighter. Slad used full automatic support on her, believing that his abilities had worked on their own to help the old woman. The effect was to temporarily increase his physical abilities and compensate for his ailments by supporting his muscles. As the name suggested, his skill was not under his control. But Slad knew it would be triggered by his desire to help someone. Thinking back to the others, he wondered if they were all right. Something made him come to his senses. Slad thought that automatic support wasn't such a great skill, knowing that the group of heroes would remain strong without it. The boy escorted the woman to her home, considering it his duty to help those in trouble. He couldn't use the automatic support on himself, but he used it for the benefit of others. If he couldn't save the world directly, at least he would be helping those around him. As a thank you, she decided to treat him to ice cream just when he was hungry. There was an atmosphere of friendliness and warmth in the Adventurers Guild. The secretary welcomed him, assuming he wanted to join their ranks. Slad explained that he had been an adventurer before, but then retired. She thought he had an adventurer's badge then, but the guy didn't think he'd need it. The girl asked him to fill out a form so they could verify the information with their main office. Slad asked if it would somehow identify him. She replied that it would, since it was magic ink. It was unusual that this pen could really identify him. Then he saw fit to write out each letter clearly. He should have waited for the secretary to call him once they confirmed his identity. Sounds of conflict could be heard in the distance. The elfess stated that instead of harassing someone, it would be better to go in search of goblins. Slad had heard that elves didn't like the smell of alcohol, so they weren't often seen in such establishments. Even stranger, she was nearly naked. Considering the bearded man's gear, he was a veteran. And this elven woman was probably just recently arrived from her homeland. The conflict didn't stop there. Intervening, Slad suggested that they disperse peacefully. However, his intervention caused them to react negatively. The adventurer decided that the girl should be grateful that he had just christened her into the guild. Slad urged her not to give in to the provocations of someone who was a head taller than her. He noticed that it was a terrible thing to do on the man's part. Suddenly, the adventurer realized he hadn't seen the man's face before. Judging from his equipment, he was a rookie. This man was simply furious. Standing up from the table with obvious hostility, he threw a punch at him. The adventurer stated that any insolent person in this guild needed to be educated. He offered to step out. However, Slad didn't think they should go that far. He realized he had no other choice. Holding the boy back, the elfess admitted it was her fault. The man noticed that it didn't concern her. He wanted to put up a battle right on the main street so everyone could see his superiority. The man attacked with brutal force. Hansa, the bear killer, was a rank B adventurer in the guild. He was considered to be unrivaled in the neighborhood. The elfess was startled as she realized how strong her opponent was. She realized that he had protected her. The secretary returned to the boy, who was not in attendance. Recognizing that the newcomer with black hair had been taken outside, she was horrified. The girl rushed outside to save Hansa as quickly as possible. The enemy's hopes of immediately eliminating the newcomer were not realized. This person was like a huge bear. He possessed unexpected speed and savagery beyond any limits. His punches were quite strong. But then Slud realized that they had to be strong. Observing the speed of the newcomer, Ganza doubted that he was one. Slad replied that he was the slow one. Very quickly, the opponent was exhausted. The spectators, who were bored with the spectacle, decided that Ganza was just feeling sorry for the guy. Slad offered to finish. He didn't want to humiliate such a promising adventurer. Wasn't his armor heavy? Ganza couldn't afford to make jokes about him. Suddenly he felt a heaviness in his body. His arm felt numb, and he couldn't move it. The man thought it was the boy's fault. However, the man noticed that because of Hansa's alignment against him, his skill was making him weaker and weaker as a result of the automatic weakening. The opponent had never heard of this skill before. Slud called it unique. These skills were incomparable. They could not be obtained naturally. And each such gift was unique. It could only be obtained once in a lifetime. The possessors of such skills always went down in history as heroes. Ganza realized that if this guy owned a unique skill, he was incredibly powerful. The adventurer didn't understand why he was revealing his abilities to someone like him. He thought there must be people who were jealous of his skills and wanted to kill him, or organizations that wanted to take advantage of them. He considered the information about the skills to be his most intimate knowledge. Slad explained his desire to keep him alive and asked him to surrender. Ganza didn't believe in defeat from the newcomer, but Slad wasn't going to listen to him. If he didn't surrender, his muscles would gradually weaken and his bones would break. This would affect his internal organs. Then he would lose consciousness and die. Ganza was adamant, and as a rank B adventurer, he was unwilling to accept defeat from a rookie. His stubbornness played a cruel trick on him. A powerful attack like lightning rained down on him from the sky. The force was so crushing that it left no chance. Ganza felt his armor suddenly become heavy. That was why Slad had asked about the armor. The rate of loss of muscle mass was more noticeable than expected. If it continued like this, it would be quite dangerous. Slud suggested for the last time that he give up. There was no way the thought of that was going through his mind. Losing to a newcomer was beyond the realm of reality. He, being the strongest Hansa in the city, didn't want to lose to a newcomer. Suddenly, a voice called out, summoning Slade Meisty SSS rank SSS. The guild master wanted to meet him. The man realized that his opponent was not a rookie. At that moment, his hostility disappeared. Unexpectedly, that naked girl pounced on Slad. She was extremely appreciative of her protector. Her forms were quite alluring. The elf was afraid that he would get hurt because of her. Her name was Ethica. He apologized for making her worry and thanked her. The guild master, having heard about the SSS rank adventurer, resolutely headed towards him. He stopped in front of the man who possessed incredible power. Executing an earthly bow, the guild master apologized from the guild for the inconvenience caused. Slad would have been glad if he hadn't said that. The old man was honored to have an SSS rank adventurer appear in their guild. Secluded in his office, the lad remained humble, explaining that it was in the past. The weakest dragon slayer, peerless, invincible, unemployed, rumors from across the sea had reached the guild master about his nicknames. Slad was indeed confused. His abilities were quite ordinary, but his two unique skills, auto-buff and auto-debuff, made allies stronger and enemies weaker. He hoped he could start a new life there, so he sailed to the new world. The reason he gave for his arrival to their guild was money. The guild master thought he was joking. The SSS rank had power, status, and prestige, so he figured he would never have to worry about money. The guy explained that he didn't have that much money, and he himself lived in the village and was self-sufficient. The old man again took it as a joke. However, he must have an S-rank badge or higher. That way he could get free food, drinks, and lodging from the guild member stores. The guy stopped in front of the mansion building. He was glad that this was the first time his rank was useful to him. The head of an elven woman peeked out from behind a tree. After barely being seen, she disappeared. It was hard to believe what had happened. The girls of the hero team were shocked that Slad had run away without telling them anything. Aries felt indifferent towards him. The group of heroes that was supposed to save the world would fall apart just because he was kicked out of it. The heroes' team members were the witch Remery and the holy maiden Disha. The departure of their comrade came as a shock to them. Disha considered it a betrayal that must be avenged. However, the witch knew that Slad could not do that. After all, the one who taught a half-breed like her the language was Slad. The thoughts of one of the team members were occupied with a quiet life. The hero Aries decided that it would only happen when he took revenge on the guy that betrayed his comrades. A story about heroes was found on a bookshelf. Slad was in the city's flea market, where there is anything the soul desires. Surely in these stories one would find information about the races. According to the book, dwarves are stubborn, but strong and agile. Elves showed almost no emotion. They were also shy and distrustful of strangers, which was nothing like Ethica. The elfess was a budding adventurer. She was too different from the elves he had read about. An hour ago, someone had approached the secretary about an errand for fresh slime from Curran's ice cave. That person was Slud, who wanted to try the ice slime candy they give as a reward. The guildmaster thought he could eat them at least every day. The old man suggested doing an easy task, like taming the dragon Alsad in the west, but it didn't seem easy to the boy. Then, overreacting, he suggested exploring the old ruins. Ethics came to the commotion. There were few tasks here for her rank, so she offered to do one together if he was free. That was the elimination of the goblins. Slad was just about to do something easy. The guildmaster sensibly concluded that with the education of newcomers, the adventurer's power would grow. The guild would begin to prosper. And with it, the economy of their bustling town. He sent the boys on their way. They were going on a mission with no money, so they had to search for the most essential items at the flea market. Ethics found the dagger Slad needed, but didn't understand why, since he wasn't a thief. The door swung open, and someone's silhouette stopped at the entrance. It was the owner, who told them to just look around while he was gone. He demanded they get out immediately, or else they would be paying for all this stuff. The aroma of freshly brewed tea filled the room. The guildmaster wondered why the secretary had given the boys the task of dealing with the goblins so easily. In fact, it only seemed like a simple task. Yesterday, a group of experienced adventurers had also gone on this task and did not return. Everyone was whispering about this assignment, and just in case, they were avoiding it. That's why it was considered a high-ranking assignment. Going on the assignment, the boys considered the goblins as small opponents. Ethics had seen them in the elven thicket many times. Slade knew that singly they were weak and careless, but can become dangerous when they gather in groups, so you need to send out occasional clearing expeditions. There were also goblins, who attacked girls and allowed themselves to be indecent. They were called hobgoblins. Hobgoblins were the descendants of a girl from the Earth race who got pregnant by a goblin. They were smarter and stronger than the others, and some of them were over 10 meters tall. As he continued to share his knowledge of goblins, Slade felt awkward. He realized he was talking too much, and it wasn't something he should be telling the girl about, but Athika liked it. She found him amusing. She had thought she was bothering him with her request to join her, but now she saw it was okay. If a team was to be assembled, he was the only one she would want to invite. Slade reflected on the fact that usually elves behaved differently and didn't trust humans, but that didn't apply to Athika. Finally, they found the tracks of the goblins. They led to a cave where the monsters had already settled in. Their lair was right in the middle of the forest. Slade didn't know how to get rid of the sentries. The girl remembered that she hadn't told her abilities yet. She summoned a creature. It was the spirit of the wind, Sylph. Based on that, the guy realized that she was a spirit priestess. He also knew about their special skill. The more exposed the body, the more intimacy with the spirits increased. Until then, Slade had thought it was her way of showing off her shape. He had offended her greatly, but if she continued to resent it, the goblins would notice them. Wind Spirit hurriedly borrowed his strength and shot at the goblins from there. She was more serious than usual. One arrow had to split and hit 3 enemies at once. The elfess had never done anything like this before. Slade asked her to trust her friend. As the shot was fired, the automatic support activated. The arrows rushed towards the target, destroying everything in their path. The girl was amazed by this terrifying power. The guys admired the mighty Sylph, who had defeated 3 goblins at once. Ethics would have been happy if Slade had praised her as well. But the goblins perked up and rushed to attack. Slade picked up the dagger. He destroyed the attackers with frenzied, indomitable ferocity, leaving them no chance of survival. Ethics was sure she had shot right at a vulnerable spot. The guy knew it was impossible to miss under the influence of automatic support. Slade returned to the goblin for no apparent reason, which made the girl puzzled. He was gathering materials. His body parts would help them get the reward. They would use them as proof of victory. A certain amount of money was given for the goblin. He explained to Ethics that the work of an adventurer is not as marvelous as that of a hero. Money, fame, ambition, these selfish desires drive us. He who is willing to do anything survives. Ethics seemed too kind to him. Even with monsters was so merciful that it involuntarily drove the arrow away. He had no special skills to teach her. He was only capable of showing her what the life of an adventurer was like. Slade held out his sword to her and told her that she should try it too. This way was brutal, but now she knew the truth and she still had a chance to go home. The battle in the forest continued. The boys had to fight an incredibly huge hobgoblin. He was so distraught that he wouldn't even look at them. The enemy would have to be hostile against him for the debuff to work. Slade imagined what would happen if he attacked them. The young adventurer, inspired by the encouragement, boldly attacked her enemy. She couldn't let him touch her family. Slade was curious as to what the meaning was in those words. She remembered that he had saved her at the risk of his life, so now they were family. Protecting those dear to her heart was her selfish desire. She hoped his was enough to be adventurous. As a child, Slade had been told that elves did not get along well with humans. But they called their recognized companions their family, and for the rest of their lives, they cherished that strong bond. And that's when he remembered something. Elves were said to be cold-blooded and distrustful of strangers, but in truth, no one else cared for their family as genuinely as they did. He remembered the goblin's ear. Ithika knew that if prepared properly, it would make a good medicine that would definitely help cure a lot of bruises. Once again convinced of her kindness, Slad would also like to run errands and travel with her. He welcomed her to his team. One of the hero's team members was about to leave her, which perplexed the leader. Aries was outraged that he was going to run away and give up saving the world. The boy threatened, confirming his serious intentions. Unlike the witch and the holy maiden, he didn't care about the fate of the world. He thought that the hero team was a chance to get more treasures from the dungeons. But did he have any left now? He thought everything was fine until the one they called a simple porter left. The mention of Slad made Aries' hands clench into fists. It made him furious. However, the lad's decision was firm, and he wasn't leaving because he wanted to run away or become a traitor. Aries was sure that even if the useless Slad participated in the battle, nothing would change. The boy stopped at the door. For the last time, he said he was going to check it out. He felt incredibly light as he left the mansion. From now on, it was up to him to decide where he wanted to go. But wouldn't Slad be angry? He had a gift, so he understood. He's terribly scary when he's angry. You have to be extra careful. Aries' coming-of-age ceremony began, where his skill was to be recognized. He turned out to be a born hero. So at 15, Aries became their savior, the only one who could defeat the devil. He was indifferent to everyone but himself. But the whole crowd danced to his tune. All he had to do was enjoy the way they bowed their heads to him. He agreed to fight the devil with a few conditions. But Slad stood in his way. Aries was sure that if he disappeared, the girls would finally pay attention to him. He didn't understand why it had ended this way. It was because a simple porter had walked away. Right, top, left. There was just rock, earth, and sand everywhere. Slad and Ithika had been wandering around the cave for too long. The boys saw fit to extinguish the torches for their own safety. It wasn't difficult for the girl, but then he wouldn't be able to see anything. In time, his eyes would get used to the darkness. Slad told him that his comrade had once been a specialized thief. Although he was walking behind and couldn't see the traps, thanks to the imitations of his movements, he was able to bypass them. He realized that he would have an easier time with her. She only needed to cover him with the power of night vision. Ethics assured him that he could count on her. Did they really need to be on guard, she asked. That hobgoblin was their leader. The boy thought he was. Judging by his size, he was the leader. However, the hobgoblin had lost his temper so much that he completely failed to notice them on the path. It was as if it was running away from something. They discovered a trap in the form of ratchets. It seemed obvious to the girl, who stepped forward confidently. The girl was sure that it was impossible to fall into such a trap, but to her surprise she fell into it. Those two clever goblins had made a false trap not from above, but from below. Ethics said it was very brazen of them. The pit was incredibly deep. In addition, the position of this trap was perfectly thought out. If you went around it, or went all the way around it, you'd end up in the hole one way or another. Slad assumed that a goblin mage was waiting for them. A goblin could use dark magic and cast curses using negative emotions. Would they be able to crawl under the ratchets? If a goblin appeared nearby, they would be at a disadvantage. Slad didn't want to neglect Ithika's safety. Suddenly an idea popped into his head. He asked if she could summon the earth spirit Nomu, as small as possible. Though the small spirit was weak, they needed it. Ethics proceeded to summon it without reservation. The tiny creature appeared in her hands. Slad believed she and Noma could handle it. The fight had begun. Silhouettes of angry monsters appeared out of the darkness. As expected, the goblins were dodging traps, and they were deliberately ringing their ratchets. But the boys also prepared a trap. They had done a great job. Slad just figured that if a smart goblin was running everything, his subordinates should know the location of the traps too. Then he looked at Ethica and remembered the spirit Nomu, who has the ability to control the earth. He helped them expand the original hole to a huge size. The goblins fled along what they thought was a safe path until they fell into their trap. It is a simple plan, but it would be beyond the power of an ordinary man to set such a trap. Slad has learned from an old friend how to triumph by outsmarting the enemy. But it was unforgivable that they would have to ask Noma to bury a hole that was so difficult to dig. The industrious spirit asked to rely on him. Upon exploring the cave, Slad found nothing of note. The path they came from and the other paths were connected. There were also a surprisingly large number of footprints. This room was definitely used for traveling between paths. Most likely a goblin could appear there at any time. Ethics suggested leaving Nomu's friends there, knowing that they would definitely be able to handle it. Slad reasoned that a spirit could only be summoned in one place at a time. He would prefer to walk this path together with Nomu. This time, the girl decided to summon a bigger spirit and they would all fight together. She summoned Nomu's friend, who was an enlarged version of him. They wouldn't be able to pass until he woke up. The girl hadn't planned on summoning such a huge one. Slad knew it was because of him. His automatic support had its flaws. It unknowingly enhanced the skills of the support object. This ability strengthened the friend's body and slowed down the enemy, bestowing power, but it was impossible to control. That was why Slad had recently asked to summon the smallest spirit. The goblin, unable to resist the power of the huge creature, fled. There was probably a boss room in that direction, so the guys should be ready to strike. Ithika decided that she should do it. She managed to cover the passage with earth. The guys reasoned that they could block all other paths. Then the goblin reinforcements wouldn't get through. When the enemy weakens and tries to escape, they will be trapped. They decided to put the dug-up earth in the passage. So, they enthusiastically began the battle. Slad tried to remember the last time he was so excited for an adventure. All he had heard in the hero's team was swearing, and since his retirement, people had challenged him time and time again for a skill. Ethics asked why he froze in place. The guy suddenly felt a pleasant aroma. He realized that this was what adventure should be like. The guys advanced through the cave where the atmosphere was not very pleasant. Slad knew that goblins were fond of such rituals. The mage was not far from them. Looking at the scenery, the girl suddenly wondered if they had used a real human skeleton. Suddenly the atmosphere became heated, and it became clear that the goblins had an internal conflict. After witnessing the fire magic spell in action, Slad guessed that the boss was somewhere close by. They approached the main area of the cave. In front of them was not just a mage. It was a monster of a rare species, a goblin witch. Goblins were small monsters that gathered in groups. Essentially, the upper-class goblins were divided into two types: hobgoblins that used physical strength, and goblin mages that wielded hate magic. The male specimens treated the female gender as slaves. However, occasionally a female was able to mutate and gain the skills of a goblin mage. And then she would rise to the top. This was the monster of a rare species, the goblin witch. The witch's hatred of oppression by men was different from that which drives goblin mages. Apparently that hobgoblin was trying to escape from her domain. Slad didn't realize what this place was. Figuring that this monster was in cahoots with the rest of the goblins, the guy was going to hurry up and call for reinforcements. Ethics had noticed something. These goblins had caught the adventurers. Remembering the human bones along the way, the girl realized that they were going to use these guys in some strange ritual. Slad was convinced that it was an impossible fight for a newcomer like Athika. Besides, this monster probably had rare abilities. He called out to Athika and suddenly remembered Aries' words. Slad agreed with him. He was a mediocre person who didn't possess outstanding strength. His skill worked on its own, so it went unnoticed. So Slad tried his best to utilize the numerous items at the rear of the team, but was still just as behind. He always stayed in the rear. But now he could help, save those adventurers and Ethika. He had decided that the one who would defeat the witch would be him. The boy asked Athika to attack the surrounding enemies with Nomu instead of attacking the witch. The huge creatures rushed into battle. Their powerful paws shook the ground, and the air was filled with rumbling. Everything was going according to Slad's plan. A few goblins stood in his way, but Athika's forest spirit friends handled them perfectly. The enemy used a large-scale spell, a fireball. He couldn't let her perform a technique that no one else used. It was quite ordinary. However, it could be used in another way. Slad used provocation. He was sure that this attack the witch would definitely direct at him. The guy had foreseen the development of the battle. The elfess, not knowing his intentions, was frightened. Her heart pounded frantically as she noticed his figure dissolve into the shadows. Slad had used his fully automatic debuff in this battle. He was glad to catch his opponent off guard. The witch had yet to realize that she was powerless. In her eyes, he was simply astonishingly powerful. So she would use poison claws and let her guard down, but too slowly. Because Slad had foreseen this outcome and got ahead of her. Then he had defense against spells and poison claws. She was already helpless. But the hostility was still there. Ethics now knew his rank, and he had to tell the truth. Slad revealed that the witch was weakened by his unique skill, a fully automatic debuff. She didn't even have the strength to stand on her feet. With that, he explained the incident in the battle with Hansa. At first, the fully automatic debuff reduced the opponent's physical power to the limit, and with each subsequent second, it caused accelerated aging. The changes were imperceptible externally. The effect increased with touch. Therefore, even with a light touch, the bones would break with a crack. Ethics called this skill too powerful. However, if the hostility disappeared, everything returned to normal. The goblin witch born in hatred had no idea how to trust others. Ethics saw fit to give the poor thing a cure as soon as possible. Slad replied that it was useless. The witch was experiencing what was called an accompanying curse. It was a rare skill that hit the enemy with an attack that was aimed to kill the witch. Therefore, it was impossible to destroy her, only allowing her to die a natural death. It was also possible to poison or exsanguinate her, so his abilities were useful this time. A great emotion awakened in Athika. She sympathized with the unfortunate creature that was forced to live only by hatred and cursing everyone. Slad knew what would happen now. That hatred would destroy her. He hoped that at least in the next life, she could be happy. The boys freed the adventurers and headed for the exit together. They were truly grateful to their rescuers, who were professionals in their work. The group walked towards the light. Finally, they were outside where everything breathed spaciousness and a sense of freedom. Slad congratulated Athika on completing her first errand. He recalled what she had said before entering the cave. that her selfish desire was to protect those dear to her heart. Those adventurers were strangers to her, but they were people who wanted to protect the city no matter what. So he decided to celebrate that first. She was able to save them. He thought she was an excellent adventurer. The guys were going to have a party at the bar. The girl thanked him. She was excited to go on her first adventure with him. If not for him, only defeat would have awaited her. That's why she wanted to continue to team up with him. Slad remembered that they had talked about it while running an errand, and he planned to stay with her. He agreed with her. Ethics was ecstatic that they would confidently continue on their journey with her bow and perfume. She thought the next task would be even harder than this one. However, this confidence made him feel uneasy. It was night outside when the boys stopped at the bar. Slad realized that his friend was drunk. Ethics was outraged that her archery skills and the summoning of that strong spirit were only to his credit. The girl couldn't accept that without getting drunk. Slad couldn't say it when she looked so happy. Ethics thought she had been useful to him. He stated with feeling that she was, and that her abilities were amazing. His skill was useless without the skill of a support object. She had helped him many times today. Ethics decided that they would go to his hotel. They entered the room. His room with a huge bathtub seemed incredible to her. The girl wanted to bathe, not even embarrassed by his presence. Slad pretended as if nothing had happened and decided to get some air. He realized she was still underage, but elves age slower than humans. He tried to push thoughts of that away. Ethics finished quickly, explaining it away with her condition. Her expectations of the SSS rank room had been met. The girl flopped onto the soft bed. Slad tried to get rid of the intrusive thoughts. He decided to distract himself by treating her with sweets. He had to stay in the kitchen for a while. She was asleep by then, as she was tired after her first adventure. She told him that it was fun, and the boy agreed with her. He thought about how long he had thought adventures were fun. After his journey with his old friend ended, all sorts of guys who were interested in his skills started hanging around him. Then he joined the hero's team as a simple porter. His abilities were too famous in the old continent, so he gave up adventurism. However, now on the new continent with ethics, he could make up for it as an adventurer. But it was worth putting that aside for now and thinking hard about how to save the cost of traveling. Or better yet, where he could sleep. You couldn't just lie down next to a girl. The nights on the new continent were so long. Here the exuberant adventurer could quench his thirst. The problems and worries accumulated inside. The girl asked for it all to be poured into her. She appealed to Mr. Slade. She wanted him to possess her. Ithika fell asleep in his bed. She was still childishly innocent, but her forms were impressive. Trying to distract himself, Slad thought about the records of S-rank privileges. One of the privileges offered was free nightly entertainment. It wasn't uncommon that a mistake by a man and woman one night could cause a rift in their crew. The guild provided an opportunity to prevent such situations from happening. This system existed not only on the old continent, but also on the new continent. This opportunity was different from a normal summoning in that one could also talk to the girl about the problems that were bothering them. Midi figured Slad hadn't expected things to turn out this way. When an elf called a man of another race family, it amounted to a desire to marry him. Such were the traditions of the elves that he was unaware of. First of all, family did not consist of friends. The boy recalled that a book he had read as a child said that elves called recognized companions that way. She explained that it was incredibly difficult for a girl to recognize a man of another race with all her heart. Besides, there was nothing surprising about it. The simple-minded elf was helped by a complete stranger, and an adventurer of SSS rank which was considered a gift of fate. If he wished, Mitty was not opposed to becoming a second wife. Slad repeated that he couldn't buy her out without having the money to do so. At home, she thought, this child had no friends besides the spirits. Among their race, men didn't even look at such fat women, which elven women were. Her siblings were only surprised by her spirit summoning abilities. Slad assumed she knew how to summon spirits, being a former adventurer. With these skills, the girl was able to become a rank C adventurer. Suddenly, Mitty leaned against him. She gently kissed his ear. She explained that if his girlfriend kissed his ear like that, it was a marriage proposal. To show that he agreed, he should kiss her back. After telling him about the ritual, she asked him to cherish this child. Elven women are very gentle, but if a man betrays them, they will not forgive it. Slad asked to stop bullying him. She figured that if they became teammates, he could tell it was all on friendly terms. He also didn't like that she was trying to lure him down a dark path. Ethics was delighted with the food. She called out to Slad. The boy told her he was taking a little walk. He was served breakfast. Before he could sit down, the food was brought to him. Ethics looked at him questioningly. He couldn't make eye contact with her after what Mitty had said, and he was thinking too much about it. The boy couldn't even ask straight to the forehead. After all, if in fact he was deluded, he would die of shame. The secretary was shocked that these two had defeated the goblin witch. She would send the priest to bury the goblins. However, it was hard to believe that an ordinary team was able to destroy such a monster. They were both unharmed. Ethics considered it a credit to Slad, who knew what skills the enemy was using. The boy explained that he had accidentally stumbled upon it in a book one day. The secretary remembered his rank. Ethics asked if it was prestigious to have such a rank. In the first place, if one didn't have innate skills like martial or sacred skills, one couldn't become an adventurer at all. In addition, in order to rise above a rank, one had to have another rare skill in addition to the innate skill. To be more precise, the S rank was created so that people with rare skills would know their worth. The SS rank belonged to those who had a unique skill, but just having it wasn't enough. One also needed to have achievements such as saving the country. S rank was great too, but among the special SS ranks, there were exceptional individuals who had even founded an entire state. Slad knew such a person. As for the SSS rank, it was the savior of the world. So, Slud was treated as someone who had saved the world. The guy didn't think it was so impossible. After all, his skill worked on its own. The secretary offered to sign some documents. Immediately Slad took it as a confirmation of acceptance of the reward. But it was an application for marriage. She asked to marry her. The news shocked both of them. The girl was desperate and ready to become someone's wife on paper. She didn't care about her marital duty. Ethics stood up for her comrade. The secretary guessed that she was going to appropriate him for herself, which was not surprising with his rank. The Elfess didn't deny that the special rank and money was certainly a good thing. However, first and foremost, he was her close friend. That was why she didn't want Slad to marry a man who only wanted title and wealth from him. The secretary stopped resisting. She had to try or she would regret it for the rest of her life. Ethics turned around and said she would wait for him at the exit. The guys realized she was pissed. Slad wondered how important he was to her. Then the secretary inquired about his feelings for Athika. He met her outside. The guy thanked her. She said she didn't care about status or wealth, which pleased him. The Elfess saw no point in thanking for such a thing. She thought that girl was crazy. She assumed it was common for humans. He replied that even for them, it was strange. That reassured Athika. However, she thought there would be many like that girl. Suddenly Slad asked if she wanted to marry him. When he said those words, he felt very embarrassed. After yesterday's talk about marriage, it came out of his mouth involuntarily. He laid it out to her that it was customary for elves to refer to the person of the opposite sex they wanted to marry as family. The fact that he knew this made her blush as well. It also meant that the elf felt appreciation. She was convinced he had no reason to marry her. Slad had stated otherwise. She wished he would say it again when he got to know her better. Wouldn't it be troublesome to get married right after meeting her? For a moment, Slad was silent. Suddenly he laughed. The bewildered Athika seemed very cute to him. The guys still needed to buy equipment. If they didn't hurry, all the shops would close. Slad thought about his feelings for Athika. He didn't really know what he was looking for. That was how he had gotten to the new continent, with absolutely no purpose. To explain it the way Athika would say it, he felt like she was his family. Slowly, and in all seriousness, he wanted to make sure of it, believing that this was the way it should be. Their adventure was just beginning. Slad was paid a visit by a man who introduced himself as a thug. His hotel seemed quite cozy to him. Sherchaw said hello to him. The guy's calm reaction surprised him. Slad accepted the fact that he was always able to find him wherever he was. Sherchaw came to him because he missed him and also to tell him the news. He began by saying that he would not leave him indifferent. Soon, without him, the hero's team would be completely destroyed, and it would lead to the end of the world. The hero's team fought hard against the enemy, but they couldn't finish off the monster in one blow. The enemy was stronger than usual. Disha was frightened when he attacked her in a defensive position. Aries thought it was an accusation on her account, though she said nothing of the sort. The witch noticed that Slad was usually the one to help them. He would tell them about the enemy's weaknesses on the battlefield. Without a doubt, though Slad always stood aside in battle, he was never useless. Besides, this guy might have been a simple porter, but here Sherchaw was astonishingly strong. After such a loss, Aries didn't even try to find new members, much less go looking for him. She didn't understand what he was thinking. A certain creature appeared on the battlefield. It was a wyvern. Sherchaw informed Slade that the hero's team would be destroyed. The reason was because he was leaving. After all, Slud was an SSS rank adventurer. Sherchaw had noticed this. Slud should have known that a person who checked his status every morning wouldn't be able to miss such a thing. After joining the hero team, breaking and disarming traps always went too smoothly. Therefore, Sherchaw began to look for reasons. If Slud had been hiding even a little, he wouldn't have used his real name. He moved on to the second thing he wanted to discuss. He left the hero's team. The decision he had made would help him stay on the winning side, though he felt sorry for those still there. Slad didn't think Sherchaw was a bad person. Adventurers always had to risk their lives. But he didn't think the team would have been defeated if he had gone alone. Sherchaw leaving was a weighty loss. So while he would bury his talents in the local guild, they would move to the big city and find a replacement for him. Sherchaw bet 500 gold that Aries would leave the city without any additions to his team. He figured that if he wasn't with them, the hero would have to deal with the attack alone. That was too reckless, as expected of him. Sherchaw said he was overestimating him. Aries wouldn't be looking for someone in a town that didn't even have a rank adventurers, especially men he didn't consider. Slad thought he was a good adventurer. Sherchaw was amazed at his naivety. If someone whined about needing money, he would immediately give him everything. It was true that Slad did cover many people's debts, but he volunteered to act as a guarantor, so he didn't complain about anything. Now Sherchaw understood why he was constantly left with nothing. In any case, his bet had succeeded. Yesterday, Aries had left the city with the team as it was. Slad remembered that a squad should have at least 2 attackers. It is impossible to defend a rearguard alone. If his movements were restricted, the balance would be lost. In the worst-case scenario, a total defeat awaited the team. Slad thought it was unfair that Sherchaw already knew the answer, making the bet. Sherchaw reminded him that he'd already told him not to trust everyone. He wasn't going to leave him behind. Of course, Slud hadn't said a word about accepting the challenge. He knew the last thing he wanted to talk about would definitely cheer him up. A flavorful steak lay on the plate. Sherchaw happily announced his joining their team. He revealed that he and Slud were comrades on the hero's team. The fact that Slad was part of the hero's team, Ithika only found out now. However, the guy never even dreamed that a professional thug could join their team. As long as he possessed such an amazing skill, it was more profitable for Slad to stay close by. The girl was beginning to think that Slad was the hero, but didn't he look too much like an ordinary traveler? Sherchaw argued that Slad was a good man. The hero's team was in danger, and it was up to the boys to catch up with them. It was very generous to go to the aid of a man who had driven you away himself. Since Slad was the leader of the team, Sherchaw had to listen to him willy-nilly. Ethics had heard that the hero had accomplished many feats. Slad thought this conversation was inappropriate. However, he was about to reply. The hero used a holy sword, and Sherchaw complimented that by the fact that he also didn't know how to ride a horse. He was sure that Aries would probably survive, and wouldn't be surprised if he used those 2 as bait. Slad emphasized that this was how Sherchaw would fail his probation. A rude and arrogant man without a single dignity for not listening to others. Isn't that the image of their hero? Sherchaw noticed that he himself had flaws. Ethics was willing to help those guys, let alone the hero himself. Sherchaw seemed disgruntled, but, pretending to do everything under compulsion, Sherchaw continued to follow the most reasonable conclusions. It was actually important for him to go scout how the hero's team was doing. Sherchaw instructed Ithika to stop the Sylph wind. Apparently, he had noticed something. Right in the middle of the road lay a familiar hat. It belonged to the witch Rimuri from the hero's team. Sherchaw shuddered and was thrown into a cold sweat. He rushed into the forest. Ethics worried about the man who was here. Slad knew that Rimuri wouldn't have left her mother's parting gift in the middle of the forest if nothing had happened to her. By now, Sherchaw had already looked around the area. He didn't find Aries and the boys nearby. There were no traces of them, or dead monsters either. They assumed that the hat had been carried by the wind from the battlefield and decided to return. Ethics stopped the boys. She couldn't understand why they remained indifferent when their comrades were in trouble. Slad apologized for the way things had turned out. They understood how it looked from the outside, and also understood their role perfectly. If she continued on the adventurer's path, she would realize that someday too. There was nothing Slad could do about it. Sherchaw's thug was looking for a leader, and he watched from there to see if there were any changes around. Ethics apologized to him for what had happened. The boy wasn't angry at all. He himself was getting anxious at that moment, but Sherchaw calmed him down. He was quite sharp of tongue, but when he needed to hide his emotions, he spoke in a measured tone. At times like this, everyone on the team calms down, including Aries himself. In fact, Sherchaw wanted to stay on that team. The girl was going to say something about him. When they found Rimuri's hat, she heard Sherchaw saying something about a plan. She had no reason to be suspicious. But at that moment, the look on his face was terrifying. Slad knew Sherchaw was a good guy, rather greedy for riches like the other thugs. However, though he wore a mask of cruelty and caustic behavior, he secretly gave his hard-earned money to treat sick people. His facial expression might have been terrifying, but he probably wouldn't hurt anyone. Slad felt that they shouldn't jump to conclusions until they heard the answer from himself. That was more important than anything else. He was sure in the future that Sherchaw was building, they would never regret anything. Sherchaw, without hiding his emotions, informed the guys about the footprints they had found. The girl, noticing that she and Slad were so close, saw him embarrassed. Sherchaw had figured something out. He thought Rimuri was safe. There was no sign of her burial nearby. Slad reasoned that surely the Holy Maiden would have taken care of the burial in case of anything. But Rimuri was clearly incapable of fighting. She wouldn't have dropped her hat if she'd been conscious. Ethics inquired about the presence of her illness. Sherchaw detected small traces of blood, but if she was alive, she was most likely trying to regain magical powers. He offered to look at something. There was a deep mark left on the surface. It was formed by Disha's unique skill, a critical strike that brought victory from the first attack. About 50 years ago, the demon King Ushamgar suddenly appeared. He was the first and only one of his kind to create a paradise for the unclean. Under Ushamgar's rule, the monsters became ferocious. They went to war with mankind. And afterward, the demon king unleashed a curse that shrouded the world in a pall of miasma. The curse of the dead rising. Normally, the guild would send a pastor or a sacred skill holder to conduct a burial. After all, if a dead body was left, it would be affected by the curse. Witches also needed to be buried, but there was no monument or trace of the ritual nearby. So Rimuri was still alive. Especially, that slashing mark must have been left after using a critical strike. It was Disha's unique skill that dealt a precise, lethal blow to an opponent by exploiting their weaknesses. Ethics decided that with such a skill, she was surely the strongest. But it wasn't that simple. The Holy Maiden couldn't fight, she provided flawless holy defense. Bringing victory from the first attack, the skill was certainly powerful. However, the combat ability was not inherent to a sacred power wielder. First of all, the strike doesn't target monsters, so it could only be used when you were cornered. Slad asked her not to mention it in front of Disha when they met. Though they talked about the unique skill, it was a special topic to her. Up ahead, they found 2 pairs of footprints. Apparently, Disha was carrying Rimuri on her back. The team continued their search. The monster that the hero's team was fighting. It was a rare species. The wyvern was much stronger than anything they had ever fought. Aries was affected by a side effect of the healing. An air blade was used. The spell exploded with a blinding flash of light. It was elemental, but it was particularly effective against a flying object. Rimuri had used it to knock a wyvern to the ground once before. But not this time, it seemed. The wyvern didn't fall. It only made her angrier. The girl couldn't move from her spot. Her body felt as if it was anchored to the ground. Her voice was shaking, and she was barely asking for help. Aries just stood to the side. His face was impassive, like a stone mask, and his eyes read indifference. He knew she was no longer a survivor. The wyvern was hungry, and he wasn't going to stop her. At that moment, Rimuri realized she was left helpless. The monster, gritting its maw, was slowly approaching. But suddenly a miracle happened. Suddenly, a bright flash of light tore the air, and in the center of that flash appeared the figure of a girl. It was Disha, the only one who didn't chicken out and went to help her comrade. She activated her unique skill, Critical Strike. Having destroyed the monster, she was finally able to breathe out a sigh of relief. Her attention was caught by a weakened voice recalling Slade. It was Rimmery, who was lying exhausted on the ground. Her eyes were closed, but her lips were moving as if she was trying to say something. She was talking about Glad. Disha realized that if he was here, he would probably have protected Rimmery, just like that time. He wasn't wearing armor, he was just a regular porter. Like no one else, he was so weak that he could have easily died. There was a nervous chuckle from Aries, who was impressed by the sight. Turning to Disha, he noticed that she had deviated from her sacred duty. The girl asked why he didn't protect Rimmery. Wasn't her protection his sacred duty in that situation? The boy didn't think his holy sword would have helped from that distance. However, she reminded him that he was a hero and could have at least used an air blade. Aries stated that it was an elemental skill. He was so comfortable with his sword that he had completely forgotten about ordinary skills. Even if she died, he could overpower the wyvern with his magic. In retaliation to the dastardly act, she struck him with all her might. Disha realized how low he was. Aries was stunned by her behavior. The girl postponed the conversation as she had to carry Rimmery to safety. Since Disha was the owner of a sacred skill and probably still a virgin, Aries had plans for the night. And after her, he would take care of the witch, who couldn't stand on her feet at that moment. It will happen as soon as they take off their gear. When he was done, he would shut their mouths forever, giving them to the monsters to eat. He was sure that that pesky porter wouldn't be a hindrance to him now. As they continued on their way, Slade's team spotted a house in the middle of the forest. They stopped in front of a large mansion. Sherchaw had bet 1,000 gold pieces that they would stay there. It couldn't be called a bet. Those two men's footprints led here. There were only 2 pairs of footprints, but what about the other people from the mansion? It had been pouring like a bucket here not too long ago, so Sherchaw wasn't surprised that the footprints had been washed away. Ithika was hesitant to stop at this mansion. She had a bad feeling about it. For some reason, the spirits had gone silent. In that case, Slade had sent Sherchaw to reconnoiter. The girl did not rule out her mistake. Slade asked her to be true to her feelings and always speak up if something was wrong, even if it seemed to be small things. Sherchaw praised Ithika. Just as Slade had suspected, this mansion was actually a monster. He didn't know that, though they had dealt with 3 monsters that lured victims this way. The first was a house that waited and devoured magical animals. Inside the second house, a fake hotel, there were many rebellious dead hiding inside, which was a real phenomenon. At the third house, an unexpected encounter awaited them. When they knocked, no one answered. That was what was suspicious. There were no owners in these kinds of mansions, so no one answered. Sherchaw knew that Disha wouldn't fall for such a thing twice, unlike Aries. Besides, dealing with dead people couldn't help but notice their presence if it was a fake hotel. But this house didn't have countless footprints. Therefore, they could have been dealing with a third kind. Slade paused for a moment before saying this. It was a nightmare fairy, a unique monster. Slade stepped inside the mansion. A thick but warm silence enveloped him. The mansion was exquisitely decorated, but inside there was an atmosphere of mystery. Suddenly, a melodious voice cut through the silence. The boy saw her, the nightmare fairy, floating in the air. She welcomed him into her abode of dreams. He realized he was not just in the mansion, but in the heart of the dream. The boy froze, trying to realize that before him was the rarest of species, a nightmare fairy. And she was a unique monster. This meant that she was at the level of legendary monsters. Among all the monsters, 16 species were recognized as the rarest monsters. Mere mortals could not compete with them, because the power of each of them was comparable to the divine. Fairy nightmares appeared to them, using different forms that beyond their world. That's why she was honored as a god in some countries. That mansion was not the body of a fairy, but only one of her forms that wandered in their world. Sherchaw panicked when he realized he had been knocking on her door. He was amazed at Slad's calmness. Slad didn't think of the nightmare fairy as a bad monster. She wouldn't get angry even if she was touched. Sherchaw calmed down when he recognized her friendliness. But still, Slud wouldn't say she was sane. Only a truly lucky person could escape alive from the nightmare fairy's reverie. As a rule, those who entered her mansion never returned. When Sherchaw heard about it, he was about to leave them behind. Sherchaw was afraid of this rarest of species, the same as the demon king himself. Ethics didn't understand what he had to do with it. He asked if she realized that the demon king who had struck their world with curses and chaos. It is the weakest of the 16 rarest species. Imagining it was difficult. Slad noticed that the nightmare fairy was the 8th unique monster. If the strength of the unique ones depended on the ordinal number, she was somewhere in the middle. Sherchaw perceived her as another demon king who would launch another invasion. He suggested not going there if it was only possible to return by chance. Slad didn't know about those two, but Aries certainly wouldn't make it. Many believed that the fairy was forcing the lost to have terrifying dreams. In fact, people met the embodiment of their innermost desires in the dream world. Sherchaw accepted the fact, then their hero became a sleeping beauty. It was time to take action. Slad thought they could handle it. Sherchaw asked on what basis he had come to these conclusions. The boy explained that he had fought a unique monster before, when he was on the same strong team. Both of them dropped their jaws at what they heard. Slad never ceased to amaze. He ended up there completely by accident. But thanks to that chance, he was doomed to fame on the old continent. Now the guys understood why Slud had an SSS rank. But this time, he no longer had the same reliable team with him. Going there alone was dangerous. First of all, he was going to talk to the nightmare fairy and try to convince her to bring the boys back. The very thought of talking to a monster of the rarest kind sounded crazy. Sherchaw decided that he would protect the rear. Slud decided that there was no way Athika was going there. If their plan failed, he asked to tell the king that the hero was captured in the realm of the nightmare fairy. He left her outside with Sherchaw. The girl was worried that he wouldn't be able to survive. He asked her not to worry about that. If it wasn't for Athika, they would have entered the dream world without a second thought at all. Just like Sherchaw said, everyone had a role to play. She did a great job. So now it was his turn to fulfill his role. Slad knocked on the door 3 times. When he knocked the 3rd time, he found himself in a dream. He had come here to talk to the nightmare fairy. The fairy marveled that he had realized his dream. In fact, everyone forgot about it when they came to the dream abode. He cited his unwillingness to drown in dreams as the reason. She didn't think much of it. The desire to talk seemed marvelous to her. The fairy felt it her duty to give him proper hospitality. Slad's heart sank with admiration. The mansion had been transformed, with long tables in the center of the hall, laden with a variety of dishes. An orchestra played in the corner of the hall, filling the mansion with its melody. The good fairy let them eat whatever they wanted. Slad couldn't believe all this was happening to him. The fairy realized that he was underestimating her reverie. Everything that was happening in this dream was taking shape for real. So if he dies, it's going to happen for real. Because you can't wish for immortality in a dream. It's impossible to be immortal. So, contrary to the legends that all wishes are granted here, the fairy couldn't recreate what she herself wouldn't wish for. Since she insisted, the guy proceeded to eat, and it turned out to be incredibly delicious. As they said, the nightmare fairy was only trying to please the guests of her abode. That was why no one wanted to leave this place. Slad suddenly came to his senses. He wondered how to even get out of this dream. She answered that it was simple. As soon as he wished to wake up, he would wake up. She figured he didn't need to. Here he could spend a carefree life as in his fondest dreams. The boy didn't forget about those who waited for him outside. The fairy realized who he meant. She had recreated the image of Athika, and she was also completely naked. He held in his mind that she wasn't real. The image claimed that in his dreams, the guy could afford anything. Slud stated that he was tired last night. The fairy was frustrated that he continued to stay sane. Now she realized that he was already satisfied enough. If not for the precautions from the Adventurers Guild, things could have ended much worse. He was grateful to Mitty. The Nightmare Fairy wondered what the traveler wanted to talk to her about. He guessed that she read the thoughts of those who entered, but how much could she hear? She knew he wanted to wake those who had come to her abode. But it was not to be done. Only they were allowed to decide if they wanted to wake up. The next thing the fairy found out was a surprise to her. She agreed to fulfill his wish, but she wanted to hear the request personally from the traveler's lips. Then he decided to say it. The boy wanted to go to their dreams. He found himself in a new place. The fairy couldn't believe he called her along. After all, she was the only one who knew everything here. This pleased her, as not everyone wanted to spend time together. Slad thought about the fact that she could only show what others wanted to see. He broke into the little witch's dream. Of all three of them, she was most eager to meet him. They approached a small house. From there came the voices of girls playing, and the silhouette of a woman in a witch's hat could be seen not far from them. The question of why Slad was hiding his skills on the hero's team came up. That question had been on Athika's mind ever since she had heard her and Sherchaw talking about the past. It wasn't hard to guess what would happen to the hero team without such a powerful support skill. Suddenly, the girl wondered, could she even ask that? Slad, in theory, shouldn't have minded. At first, Athika hadn't even realized how much her powers had increased. She thought the spirits were just in a good mood. Sherchaw called it one of the features of the automatic support skill. It had taken him a whole month to realize that he was under the effect of the enhancement, but he had only recently realized that on top of that, Slud was also weakening opponents with the debuff skill. As far as his caution was concerned, it might seem that he just couldn't trust them with this secret, but after all, Slad was very naive. And besides, he had revealed all the cards to her so easily, and when they'd formed a team, Slad had put the truth out in the open. So he wasn't even trying to keep anything a secret. He must have had his reasons for hiding his skills from them. Ethics was interested in the matter. That was something Sherchaw didn't know. He speculated that Slad might have told her because of his crush. She thought that would be nice of him. Sherchaw had a new reason to tease them. The girl asked why, despite having such an incredible skill, Slad had such a humble opinion of himself. Sherchaw explained that he quite seriously thought his abilities were mediocre. Ethics couldn't believe it. The guy suggested that she could imagine her life without the abilities of a spirit priestess. The girl never thought she could lose touch with her friends. That was the point. Even as a spirit priestess, she considered herself a regular adventurer. They were inseparable from their abilities, especially when it came to the unique skills that people acquired from birth. It was no exaggeration to say that these abilities were a part of themselves. For Slade, the skills of automatic buff and automatic debuff were commonplace. Ethics thought he should at least feel more confident when using them. Sherchaw replied that this wasn't the case, as Slad couldn't use his abilities. The adjective automatic fulfilled an important role in the naming of his skills. Their skills always depended only on themselves, so they activated and used the abilities at will. But Slad couldn't do that, because automatic skills were triggered regardless of the bearer's desire. The girl realized why Slad was so indifferent. But the reason wasn't just that. He just didn't think his skill was that amazing. Sherchaw was even a little envious of him. Such abilities relieved him of the burden of responsibility. It wasn't easy to shape up when you had to face the consequences of your actions. Ethics thought his skill was equally amazing. She also envied the strong guys. Meanwhile, in Rimri's dream, a happy and carefree life was flowing. Slad hid behind a tree. Judging from the hat, her dead mother was in front of him. They didn't know yet which girl was the one they were looking for. Rimri was a half-breed with dead pale skin, and they were both no different from normal human children. Slad didn't listen to the fairy. He understood her wish. All she wanted was to be born an ordinary girl. Slad greeted the woman, noting that the weather was lovely today. The fairy praised him for every little thing. The woman was also friendly to her guests. One of the girls rushed towards him, knowing his name. It was Rimri, who was different from the witch he knew. The girl said she liked Uncle Slad. He replied that he liked her too. The boy explained to her that they were in a deep sleep and he had come to get her. He offered to go home together. However, Rimri abruptly refused. He did not want to destroy such a happy dream for Rimri. The nightmare fairy would not harm her, even though it would. Slad announced his departure, apologizing to his mother for disturbing her. Rimri was surprised at his desire to return. She asked him to think again. He could stay here with them. Suddenly, the woman thought about something. She asked the opinion of the other child. The girl didn't object. Slad didn't know who she was. They seemed to be the same age. The boy explained that he was expected in another world. He was not part of Rimri's dream. He apologized. As he got farther away from the house, the surroundings began to change rapidly. He found himself in a familiar room with a girl. She didn't want him to leave. The age, the clothes, it was the Rimri he knew. Only her skin color was like a normal human. It wasn't hard to guess that she hated her demon blood. If only she could have been born a mere mortal, this wouldn't have happened. Slad couldn't understand what she was talking about. Perhaps she had had such a bitter experience in her life that she couldn't accept herself now. The boy asked if she remembered what he had once said to her. Rimri couldn't forget such a thing. People used to despise her, thought she was nothing. They wouldn't let her live her life in peace. Only Slad recognized her fully. She wanted to hear it again. The boy remembered that they had talked to her then in this very room. He thought he had said something stupid, but she didn't think so. Slad had said that Rimri was beautiful just the way she was. They held hands. He asked if she remembered her goal. The girl remembered that she wanted to defeat the Demon King, for the world to recognize half-breeds like her. It was hard to imagine. Even if she defeated the Demon King, there would still be those who wouldn't stop despising half-breeds. But Rimri knew that. She had chosen this path, even though she was well aware of the difficulties ahead. Slad wanted to help her. It was time to wake up. Slad and Rimri, also holding hands, left the place together. They both woke up. Suddenly, a feeling of awkwardness swept over the girl. She had been so sincere in the abode of dreams, but now the real Rimri was in front of him, not her dream image. All she lacked was a hat. It had been several days since their last meeting with Sherchaw. Rimuri wondered where he had been all this time. The boy called it a long story. First, he returned her hat. It was very dirty. The girl leaned it against her, as if it were her dearest possession. She apologized to her mother. Ethics believed in the best. They could just call the houseboy. He would fix everything in no time. Ethics introduced herself as Slad's new friend. The witch was amazed by her form. Slad understood what she was trying to say, but he had nothing to do with it. There was no place here that could be called home. Ethics enthused that she could summon the spirit that inhabited every dwelling. And then he would put the hat in order. Rimuri came to love the idea. The girls got along quite well. Sherchaw suggested that Slad arrange a little exchange of information before he went to the mansion again. It was clear from the story that Aries was the one who drove Slad away. Rimuri concluded that the hero had lied to them. This did not surprise Sheesh, for his actions were predictable as always. Rimuri told them everything that had happened. Aries had gotten the hero's team into a fight with a wyvern, a monster of a rare species. Sensing imminent death, Disha saved everyone by using a critical hit. Then she carried Rimuri on her back, cheering her up with warm words. Aries insisted on staying the night in the mansion they found in the forest. The Holy Maiden was against it, but agreed when she realized she could do without rest. The girls agreed about Aries. Slad reminded them that he was a hero whether they wanted him to be or not. They realized there was nothing they could do about it. Ethics still didn't understand if the title of hero was really that important. Sherchaw had yet to meet people who didn't know that. Rimuri told him that there was a demon king currently reigning over the world. And he was immortal, was a new monster of the rarest kind, which was considered the weakest. But he was different from mere mortals like them. The demon king enveloped the entire world in a curse. The monsters became violently rampaging. Unable to free themselves from his power, the demons began to attack humans. They were once friendly. To defeat the demon king, it took the sacred power of a hero, which was Aries. That was the end of the story. The elfess understood and apologized for the inconvenience. Rimuri replied that it was not her to blame, but the demon king and Aries. So much she hated the hero. Ethics concluded that this goofy guy was the only one who could save their world. But it turned out that wasn't quite the case. The hero's skill was rare, but not unique. It could also be possessed by someone other than Aries. That seemed impossible. The hero's skill might not be unique, but it occurred once in hundreds of centuries. That was indeed the case. Never before had more than one hero appeared at the same time. Except Rimuri didn't want to give up hope. It would be better if Slud was the hero. The boy reminded her that he was just a simple unemployed man. Rimuri didn't think of him as such. To her, he was a brave unemployed man. Sherchaw also realized that his feat was far better than heroic. Not only did he wake up from the nightmare fairy's sleep, but he also brought Rimuri back to them. It could even become a legend. Slad noticed that the nightmare fairy was surprisingly friendly with the guests. He asked to keep it a secret. Sherchaw hinted that silence comes at a price. Rimuri made a decision. She too had left the hero's team to become a comrade of Slad. Sherchaw asked if she was sure of that. It was impossible to defeat the Demon King without the hero's sacred power, and she had decided to give up her goal of glorifying the half-breeds. The girl was sure there was another way. Sherchaw confirmed it. A realization came to Slad. He kept wondering why Sherchaw had encouraged him to follow Aries. Sherchaw recognized that the wyvern and the nightmare fairy were not part of his plan. When they found Rimuri's hat, he felt remorse for abandoning them. He felt relieved. The boy was very sorry about it. The girls didn't understand what was happening. Sherchaw offered Slad an explanation. As he realized, Sherchaw deliberately ran away at the same time as him. To teach Aries a lesson, and to teach him the value of friendship. There was silence. Sherchaw became furious. He stated that it was not like that at all. He wanted Disha and Remry to leave as well. The boy recalled their desire to defeat the Demon King. Unable to handle his duty as a hero, he would not be able to lead the team to success. He saw no point in continuing the journey with a good-for-nothing human. Slad was shocked to hear him speak out about Aries like that. Sherchaw stated that it was better that Slad realized how big a role his skill performed. Remry asked what his skill was. It was night outside, and only the crackling of the fire broke the silence. Now one more person knew of his abilities. The boy decided it was time to head back. Sherchaw still didn't know how to cope without the hero's sacred power. But he was confident. They had the power to create a team that would defeat the Demon King. It seemed to Slade that they were overestimating him. He realized that he might not be able to come back. But the guys knew he would definitely come back. Slad was grateful to them. A knock sounded on the door of the mansion. He promised to bring Disha back. There was a loud sound of a wall being breached. He was not welcome here. He didn't understand why this was happening. The aggressor harbored a great hatred for him. Eventually, Slad fought Disha. A new world spread out before Slad. The Nightmare Fairy was glad to meet the traveler. The boy was surprised that they were not inside the mansion. The fairy remembered his wish. They had arrived in a small piece of such a huge world. All he had seen here was the dream of the Holy Maiden. She is a very noble child. It was not difficult to realize such a significant dream. Slad had come to the conclusion that what mattered in the dream world was how noble you were. He thanked her for her help, addressing her affectionately. The way he called her really pleased the fairy. Slad thought that such a name suited the Fairy of Nightmares. She decided that Nightmarek would be her new name from now on. The boy thought he had crossed the line with such a nickname. He wondered if she didn't care about herself at all. The only thing she should care about was what she thought he wanted. It made him wonder. The fairy had no true form in the dream. There was only her image that appeared at the call of his desires. To talk to the Nightmare Fairy, to bring back his friends, she was with him to fulfill those requests. Slad himself had created this image of the wish-fulfilling fairy he had read about in the old days. She confirmed it. Seeing the happy dreams of travelers was the meaning of her life. The form didn't matter. Slad wondered if it seemed sad because he was a simple man. She was transcending the mind of mortals. No wonder she was a monster of a unique species. But Slad could converse with her in this guise. His joy made her happy. It wasn't just part of the dream anymore. The fairy marveled at it. He was the first to fulfill her dream. She offered to put this conversation on hold. His wishes had to be fulfilled now. Slad realized she had slipped up on her answer. He tuned in to find Disha. An immaculate row of divine statues, an atmosphere of grandeur hovered in the air. This was undoubtedly a temple. Except it was so horrifying that it didn't look like a shrine. Slad saw monks, but not a single priest. Monks have a combat specialty. They barely looked like believers. People of this profession devoted their free time to training in the garden. Slad realized it was all a dream, but the sight was quite strange. Finally, he met Disha. The girl was honing her skills. She looked so imposing. Looking the same age as the Disha he knew. Still the same greenish golden hair, blue eyes, and slender body. But it wasn't a holy vestment. She was wearing the same exercise outfit worn by the monks roaming the temple. All that was left of the holy maiden's vestment was a glove. Slad wasn't versed in religion, but her prayerful pose was a perfect image from his memory. Right now, it hardly looked sacred. He walked towards her, knowing it wouldn't be easy this time. He would have to plumb the most mysterious depths of her desires. As an outsider, he was going in where the way was closed to others. He was agreeing with Nightmare. All it took was a wish. Their gazes met. The girl cold-bloodedly rushed to the attack. Slad was stunned by this suddenness. Her spinning kick was amazingly accurate. He knew that the real Disha was not capable of such a thing. Slad guessed that this was her desired appearance. He should have died instantly, but he managed to avoid such a fate. His automatic debuff had kicked in. The boy realized that he was not welcome. It was abundantly clear that skills were not active in sleep. But how did her critical strike work? Would it be activated until it reached its target? Worst case scenario. He would die. Slad tried not to think about it. Death in a dream meant death in the real world. Then she too could die from the effects of his skill. Slad turned to Disha. He asked why she was attacking. Aren't they friends? She gritted her teeth in anger. That was why the girl wanted to end him in one blow. She asked not to fight back. But Slade's automatic debuff prevented her from doing so. The guy urged her to stop. She thought he knew full well he deserved it himself. Slad still didn't understand why she was attacking him. The reason was that he had irresponsibly abandoned them, unexpectedly disappeared without saying a word, despite the fact that they all trusted him. Suddenly she realized that he was real. Slad didn't quite understand what had happened, but the effect of the skill had stopped. Most likely, she was unconsciously trying to remove the unpleasant interference and continue to enjoy her sleep. Disha recognized that Aries, who had actually just chased him off the team, had lied about his escape. But that didn't excuse the fact that Slad hadn't even said goodbye to them before leaving. Speaking of which, she thought that hitting him would be quite fair. He had been visited by these thoughts back in Rimri's dream. He didn't trust the team, even though he called them friends. All that mattered was the existence of his skill. Nothing would change if he left, he thought. But they were trying to find him. Slad had stated that he wasn't going to disappear anywhere this time, which she found it hard to believe. The guy also informed her that they were now sleeping in the mansion of a demon of a unique kind. He claimed that this was the purest truth. Disha noticed that the dream was an imperfect reflection of reality. In the dream world, things wouldn't be so believable. Slad had offered to see for himself at the temple. Disha would have refused if Aries had offered. The guy hoped she would believe it when she saw those strange monks. The temple seemed the most ordinary to her. Now it was filled with worshippers. It was all subconsciously created. Disha just didn't want to believe that they were in a dream. It seemed to him that something was wrong after all. He called out to one of the monks. The people present did not react in any way to his desire for attention. The girl thought the reason was because they were busy. Disha had lived in the temple since childhood. There was no way that no priest had ever tried to talk to her. Did she dream of getting ignored by the temple attendants? Slad tried to collate all these facts. He understood everything, but could he interfere? His insistence could have wounded his soul. Disha wanted to get back to practicing. Of course, it was practicing in the garden. She was a monk, after all. Slad realized what this was all about. When she remembered him and the hero's team, he thought she was fine. But that wasn't entirely true. Disha was a holy maiden. After learning about her skill, Disha realized that it was definitely unique. She wanted to share her joy with her parents, but they sold her to the church. Disha tried to control herself. She realized that she had to be strong. Disha took Slad's words about her being a holy maiden with surprise. After all, she had only recently taken the path of a monk. The boy thought about not interfering. She should have been given a chance to make her own destiny. She had set a goal of defeating the Demon King one day. Slad doubted that she really wanted that. The girl thought it was everyone's dream. Everyone would be grateful and live happily ever after if she pulled it off. They relied on her, and she was happy about that. Slad asked if she too was one of everyone who wished it. He remembered the incident when she had healed his wounds. Slad hadn't been the target of the attack then, so the skill hadn't worked and the wounds had been horrible. She was surprised that he was a simple porter and so reckless. Slad thanked her for her help. She didn't think it was anything special. Disha had always been like this. She had never seen anything special about helping. Treating injuries and rescuing those in need were the duties of a holy maiden. Aries was different. That's why they never found common ground. But Slad realized something. He was glad to see that even in her sleep, she was still as kind. He had to tell her that monks couldn't use healing magic. Disha refused to accept it. When the monks came to know that a holy maiden was in the temple, they became agitated. They had placed great expectations on her, and this pressure made her feel uncomfortable. It was an ordinary sight for the temple. Disha was playing the role of a priest in her dream. He was trying to convey to her what she needed to remember. Her talent was like that of a hero. By being born into this world, the holy maiden became someone that others needed. She couldn't give up her role, no matter what her own dreams were. However, Disha wanted to save this world with all her heart, so it was reflected even in her dreams. And then the girl remembered. She was a holy maiden. Slad replied that she had the right to choose. Without trying to forget anything, she just had to choose what she wanted to be, a holy maiden or a monk. That was irresponsible. Disha was surprised that he thought she had no reason to become a holy maiden. Couldn't she be glad she was born with a unique skill? Slad reminded her that she wanted to acquire a combat specialty. The girl didn't see anything wrong with not being able to be what she wanted to be. The only one who let her choose, just like that time, was him. Disha was once again convinced of that. Those were the kind of words she could only hear from him. She was going to give him an answer. At the conversion ceremony, Disha solemnly declared that she would fulfill her duty as a holy maiden and end the years-long war with the Demon King to restore peace to the land. She vowed to restore serenity to them. That meant that now it was up to her to fulfill this mission in the real world. Disha woke up Slad. He jumped off the girl abruptly, realizing that he was sleeping right in her lap. She became convinced that it was the very real dream. Slad didn't know that she had dreamed of becoming a monk. Disha admitted that she didn't really want to become one. She had always done only what she was asked to do, because it was her duty to help the common people. She constantly tried to convince herself that this was exactly what she wished for. That's why. Her desire was to find her own dream. The return of the boys made the others happy, and was a warm moment of long-awaited reunion. It was then that Disha met Athika. The saint had offered to rescue Aries as soon as possible, but Remery and Sherchaw had insisted on leaving him sealed in that dream. Disha realized he was a worthless man, but they had been partners until recently. One shouldn't abandon the sole purpose of their entire life out of personal feelings. Disha remained as adamant as ever. Her duty was to accompany the hero and save the world. Even if Aries was only strong because of Slade's skills, only a hero could use the sacred power. There was no reason to hope that there was another possessor of this gift in their time. She was convinced that only under Aries' leadership could they defeat the Demon King. Sherchaw didn't think she was that stubborn. He had nothing to add. He wasn't going to help Aries. The girl was sorry they didn't understand. She suggested that Slad speak up about it. The boy stuck to the original plan to wake Aries up. He was ready to return to the hero's team if he was accepted. Except he had one condition. He didn't want Aries to know about his skills. Saint, on the contrary, considered it a big plus. She asked Sherchaw, who was about to speak, to be silent. He was shocked at her cruelty. Disha didn't see anything wrong with using skills, and she understood that it wasn't easy. But it was natural for people to use their gift. If he was so opposed to working for the good of others, she asked how personal principles could be more important than the fate of the entire world. Slad had a hard time answering that question. The point was different. Disha couldn't wait to know the answer. The boy explained that after learning of his skills, Aries would stop joining the fight altogether. The news came as a shock to everyone. Slad decided to reveal something to the boys that no one suspected. Like them, he didn't realize it right away. It was the man who had asked him to be part of the hero's team who had said it. At first, he thought it was about his position, but it wasn't. It was a shock to him to hear about Aries' true nature. As long as he was the only one who could save the world, everything was allowed to him, and everyone around him should only praise the hero. Only Aries could defeat the Demon King. He didn't need anyone else. In fact, the hero's team was mere entertainment. He didn't need comrades, he only needed pawns. This man was indifferent to saving the world. He was driven by the lust for power. A boundless ego was all that was left of the honorable title of hero. Despite this, Disha believed that even Aries had a shred of conscience. Otherwise, he wouldn't have gone to his death fighting monsters. But when you think about it, their hero wouldn't put his life on the line. Disha saw that this guy thought he was the center of the whole world. Disha realized that all people are not perfect. Everyone imagined as a child that the whole world revolved around them. Slad picked up on the fact that Aries was sure of that now. Even after becoming a hero, he never grew up. That was what his buddy had said. The guys already realized that Aries was acting like a child. But they still didn't understand what that had to do with his skills. Slad only said that his abilities worked automatically and would not follow his instructions. The boys waited for him to say something else. But that was the whole reason. He knew there was no way Aries would accept help from anyone. Rimuri and Disha's forces weren't enough to overpower the Demon King anyway. That's why the hero would have to let Glory intervene, and he wouldn't want that. That reason was akin to childishness. Disha was shocked that the reason was so insignificant. It may have seemed petty to them, but it was so important to Aries that he was willing to hand their world over to the Demon King. Who would have thought that the key to a hero's strength is ego? Aries, the god's chosen one, defeated the Demon King by turning to a worthless porter for help. There's no way he'd accept that. The Holy Maiden refused to believe it. They had been raised with the goal of one day working with the hero to save the world. Slad had once thought he could be relied upon, but he was wrong. It was too dangerous a mistake. He realized that now. The boys decided not to tell Aries about his skills after they woke him up. In the end, Slad changed everyone's mind, and it was decided to save the hero. This conversation had a big impact on Disha. Ethics noticed her confusion. The Holy Maiden realized that she had lost her way. She had always had to move forward just to fulfill other people's desires. Instead of worrying about the unknown, Ethika suggested thinking of new possibilities. such as how each of them would strike Aries. Disha didn't expect her to be able to say such a thing. Ithika had discussed it with Remery. For some reason, it seemed to her that Slad had other plans for the hero besides saving the world. They had only met today, but it was as if Disha had known Ithika all her life. Knowing that she had no equal in a fight, the Holy Maiden decided to beat up the hero as soon as they woke him up. The boys hoped she wouldn't use a critical hit. It was time to visit Aries' dreams. Disha instructed Slad to rescue him. Feeling responsible, he went inside. The atmosphere in the mansion was no longer so colorful. A nightmare fairy flew towards the guy. This time, her face showed concern. There was a problem. The witch herself wanted to see him, and the Holy Maiden generously waited for his apology. The hero looked nothing like either of them. Seeing his dream was possible, but she would advise against it. Some people's cherished wishes could be a nightmare for others. Every dream is the owner's private world. The fairy wondered if he had changed his mind. Some souls should sleep forever. They will see the dreams they desire, and won't be able to harm anyone in the real world. Slad explained that this was not the case. Their hero was the only salvation from the Demon King. The fairy then asked what he would do if in fact it wasn't only sacred power that could destroy the ancient evil. Be that as it may, he was determined to awaken Aries. They still hadn't decided what to do next, but they definitely should have brought him back. The boys trusted Glad. Besides, did Aries have the right to run away after all he had done? Slad didn't think so. The fairy had to agree with him. He could see that she was concerned. Fairy was frightened that it was so noticeable. She resented him digging into her feelings. The boy noticed that this was coming from someone who read minds. He cared about her feelings too. She made him look in the ugliest light possible. The fairy wanted to bear herself in front of him too. Time seemed to slow down. Slad found himself in a state of weightlessness with stars shining around him. Her true face was the night sky, her marvelous dream. And those lonely stars were someone else's sweet dreams. They all slept in her. Slad came to a terrible conclusion. She said it was rude to call them victims. The Nightmare Fairy was helping them fulfill their deepest desires. They were here out of harsh reality and unfortunate fate. She knew what he was going to say. So many lives faded away in this world without accomplishing anything. She too had a cherished wish that could not be seen, only felt. It was her dream. To invite everyone in the world into her abode and give them a sweet dream forever. The space filled with doors. Dark forces began to pull Slad inside. He called out desperately to the fairy. She said it was for him too. The doors slammed shut. A mighty castle towered above the dense forest. An urgent message had been received from the Holy Maiden of the hero's team. The hero's team encountered a monster of a unique kind, a nightmare fairy, but thanks to the active intervention of a group assembled by a specialized thief, the witch and the Holy Maiden were rescued, and the third visit to the enemy's abode was successful with the hero's release. However, now the man called the porter was unconscious. They therefore requested urgent assistance from the king. The hero's condition was stable, and his mind cleared. The king stopped the subordinate. He was concerned about the porter just mentioned. Case of Seawood Bellcraft was the ruler of the kingdom of Seawood. The mansion began to collapse rapidly. The boys rushed to the place that had attracted their special attention. As the structure collapsed, Slad returned. Remery pointed to Aries, who had also gotten out of the mansion. They didn't know how to take in what was happening. Ethics guessed it had to do with the incident in the dream. The mansion had disappeared, but these two had gotten out. Surely it wasn't about losing. Sherchaw supported her version. The guys had returned alive, except they still hadn't woken up. In addition, Slad had fallen into a coma, and even the sacred spell of forced awakening could not help him. It became obvious that something had happened in that dream. Slad tried to explain to the fairy that her dream was too cruel. She would be alone forever, after all. Within his reach were all the doors that could lead him into the world of deceptive dreams. The fairy replied that it was true. Dreams had nothing to do with each other. Talking to someone in a dream was like talking to yourself. A dream is eternal loneliness. However, everyone was having a happy time without looking behind the scenes. Therefore, everything was fine. It seemed to her that the abode was a perfect dream-fulfilling world. Until she met him. He was the only one who hadn't lost his memories when he stepped foot on the mansion's threshold. Slad wondered if no one had ever spoken to her. The fairy said that there were those who came here for the purpose of chatting, but they couldn't even remember what a dream was as soon as they entered the abode of dreams. At the same time, they forgot all about their desire to talk to her. A forgotten dream cannot be realized in a dream. Slad was different from the others. The boy understood why the nightmare was too excited about his arrival. It really was unprecedented fun for her. He was the only one she was able to talk to, thanks to his strong desire to meet her. He was able to fulfill another dream of hers. Everything before had been a mistake. It was fun for her to talk to someone who was awake. She didn't know that. Maybe with her dreams, the fairy had given salvation to someone. But in reality, so many souls had lost people dear to their hearts forever. Putting his arm around her, Slad apologized to her. It always seemed to him that dreams were created by her out of bad motives. But she was actually very kind. Slad assumed he hadn't forgotten her thanks to the automatic debuff. Since the illusion wasn't intentionally created, the skill only considered its power dangerous, so it deactivated it. The fairy corrected that it wasn't just the illusion that was affected by his skill. It was just that its effect was weakened. She was immortal after all, so there was no way the aging effect could harm her. So this effect of the automatic debuff was powerless against the Demon King. The fairy noticed that her unique strength was affected by his skill. Then he'll be good enough to fight the Demon King. If he could destroy her, then surely there was a chance to defeat him too. Slad didn't understand where she was going with this. The fairy couldn't control her powers. Wherever she went, the mansion's guests would continue to disappear into the dream world without a trace. She begged to be touched. The fairy wanted to see if it was possible to kill an immortal. There was no need to doubt. He would not be able to penetrate the hero's dream at will. There was only one way left to wake him up. She would have no regrets if she was destroyed by him. She asked not to make that face, for it was wonderful. Slad stated that it was not like that at all. With that, he upset the fairy. The guy resented the fact that she was asking her friend to kill her. The fairy was surprised that he thought they were friends. Slad couldn't believe that they might not be friends after everything that had happened. Above all, he couldn't kill a child who was so remorseful. She realized that the truth was asking for something terrible. He had an idea. He didn't know if it was possible. However, Slud believed they could make it work. The fairy was worried about the possible consequences of failure. He explained that he had come to the dream world to get his friends back. Now, however, he had no reason to leave her alone. So this time, he wished he could see the dream. The Nightmare Fairy's real name was Night Vision, and there was no dream she couldn't fulfill. The fairy caught his train of thought. Slad's words penetrated her soul, awakening a whirlwind of emotions. They believed in her, and this faith gave her strength. All Slad had to do was voice his wish. He wanted her to be his partner. The bright stars dissolved into darkness, leaving behind only a silent void. The fairy disappeared, leaving him alone with the blinding white light. Suddenly his strength left him, and he collapsed to the ground. So Slad remained motionless. Suddenly he woke up in a room into which bright sunlight burst. Finding himself in the royal chambers, the guy tried to figure out if he was asleep. He heard a familiar voice. The fairy greeted him with the same sweet smile. Since she remained in the same form, he assumed he was still in a dream. But the fairy solemnly announced that they had now made it out into reality. They were able to do just as he had said. That meant his automatic debuff was working even on her. Slad was serious in his analysis and conclusions. The automatic debuff had worked on her, so the buff should have worked on her as well. The plan was simple. First, they became comrades. Her magic power increased due to his skill. Then she was able to take control of her abilities. And then it was just a matter of doing something like that. The other half depended solely on her. Slad wondered why he had suddenly fallen asleep. The fairy had admitted her guilt. Her power was too suddenly over the limit, and she was not immediately able to control it. He fell into a deep sleep that was hard to get into. He also wondered why she was in this form, even though they were in the real world. What she had done seemed almost unbelievable. The fairy had barely managed to transform her mansion into the new look she had borrowed from his memories. And that wasn't all there was to it. Now no one would forget reality when in a dream. And other people's dreams she had the power to change at will. Slad made sure that she was a unique species. So she turned the hero's dream into a nightmare, and he was quickly able to wake up. Slud wondered if this was reality, why he was here. His friends came to see him, and the fairy offered to ask it of them while she took a walk. Slad realized that giving such power to a monster of a unique species was not a well thought out act. Ithika's head appeared from behind the door. Seeing that the boy was awake, she was at his side in a flash. She hugged him tightly, snuggling up to him with her whole body. He reacted violently, despite his recent use for adventurers. Ethics ran out of the room to call for the guys. All 4 guys would pay him a visit at the worst possible moment. He clutched the blanket with his hands to hide the discomfort. Sherchaw had peeled his apples, but now Slad couldn't get up. Despite the fact that it cost him dearly to bring the hero back, Aries himself woke up almost immediately. The boys were very worried about him. He was most interested in what had happened while he was asleep, as well as why he was here and where the hero was now. A long story came out of that. The most important thing was to give him one piece of news. Upon awakening, Aries had gone to the court and reported their departure from the team. Betraying the hero was tantamount to treason. Slad was furious when he learned what the hero had done. Moreover, he sued those who had saved him from being killed. Disha was about to tell what had happened during the month while he was sleeping. When he was in deep sleep, they moved him to a dry place. It was pouring a relentless downpour outside. But it was the presence of the hero that irritated him the most. The situation seemed ridiculous and absurd to him, and he laughed openly at what was happening. More and more tense was the fact that Aries woke up, but Slad did not. The hero didn't understand why the guy needed to come back at all if he decided to escape on his own. As for that, Slad himself told him that he had been kicked off the team. He was offered an explanation. Aries had pretended as if the situation was made up, and only he was the one they should believe unconditionally. Though he himself was the man who had started running away instead of saving them. Aries reminded him that he was a useless porter who was of no use. He didn't need to be told about his opponent's weaknesses on the battlefield when the enemy could be killed with a single blow. Even if Slad was willing to protect Remery at the cost of his life, becoming cannon fodder was the most fitting destination for him. Then they noticed that if Slad didn't come to the rescue in time, he would already be dead. This finally pissed him off. He demanded a better explanation of who this elven woman was. Ethics called herself Slade's friend. He laughed nervously. Aries couldn't believe that such a man could have a girlfriend. He tried to explain to her that Slad wasn't as good as he seemed. The hero thought the best solution would be to join his team. He wanted to inspire her with his superiority. However, the person who wants to join must be at least rank A. But he would allow her to join as his lover. Remery rushed to Ethica's side. It turned out to be just as Slad had said. He really was only in love with himself. Aries could not make sense of what he had just heard. Sherchaw had informed him that it was the name of someone he had belittled. Now Aries knew what his name was. Remery anxiously asked if he knew her name. The hero simply could not call her by her name. He hadn't done it once. He didn't really know her had. Disha assumed that he hadn't bothered to memorize their names. To him, they were not companions but attendants. Not even knowing what their names were, he dispelled all doubts in one fell swoop. The hero didn't give it much thought. Aries declared that he was now part of Slad's team. The guys believed they would defeat the Demon King together. He freaked out, not realizing what was wrong with him. All four guys hugged each other tightly, as if trying to protect each other from the threat. The hero guessed what was wrong. He came to the conclusion that Slud had proved himself in bed, keeping them awake all night. Aries didn't expect them to cheat. In that second, the point reached its boiling point. Aries, before he realized what had happened, felt a powerful blow that threw him into the air. The figure of Sherchaw loomed over him. His eyes burned with cold fire, and in his hand gleamed a sword pointed directly at Aries. He had strictly forbidden him to compare himself to Glad. Sherchaw looked incredibly cool, having said everything to Aries' face. When they recalled that moment, Sherchaw's face was flooded with color. He jumped out of the room to avoid showing his embarrassment. Continuing the story, Disha said that even Aries needed a camp to sleep in. The girl sowed intrigue before telling about his next prank. There was a piercing scream that broke the silence of the night. Aries believed that even if they were not from the same team, it was not forbidden to go on night dates. The guys decided to see if he gets smarter without the dildo. It wouldn't affect the hero's abilities. They had to finish before Slad woke up. The competition began. He took a series of punches. Each one took its toll on him. It was time for Disha's punch. The girl advised him to grit his teeth. He hoped she wasn't going to use her punch. Disha pretended like she didn't hear him. She moved a few steps closer to him. It was as if time stopped, the sounds disappeared, and reality froze in tense silence. Her incredible blow was an addition to the punishment he deserved. There was no need for her to use a critical strike. His death would have caused a lot of trouble. There was still one more willing to punish him. Remery lunged at Aries like a lightning bolt from a cage. Her fist, clenched with tremendous force, pierced space. It was not just a blow, but the embodiment of her hatred, her desperation, her thirst for revenge. This was what the guys had expected. From the unique skill, unprecedented power. The next morning, Slad did not wake up. Sherchaw suggested that they continue on to the capital. After all, that was their original goal. Maybe there would be a way to wake him up there. Aries was walking behind everyone. The boys needed to get Slud out of here as soon as possible. The hero didn't understand the reason for their vigor. On the way, they encountered a monster that was affected by miasms. Fortunately, Aries was the only one who had a hard time in the battle. Slad's skill definitely activated automatically while he was asleep. From that moment on, the hero's command was no more. Ethics was worried about Slad, of course, but she doubted that outsiders were allowed into the castle. She hoped he would be taken care of. Aries grinned evilly. He, the hero, was going to meet the king. He knew they would all regret betraying him. And now they were being accused of treason. Slad couldn't believe he'd slept for a whole month. Perhaps that was the reason for his embarrassment. Disha didn't think the king would listen to Aries and hold a trial. If it wasn't for the bravery of the brilliant former SS rank adventurer, King Case of Seawood Bellcraft, not to mention his wisdom, humanity would have been wiped out by the Demon King long ago. It was the king's idea to create a hero team to defeat the Demon King. That was precisely why. Disha didn't understand his decision. Of course, she doubted that Aries' silly arguments would be taken into account, but the trial was in 3 days. And since Slad was already awake, he should be there as well. Ethica didn't know much about the human world, but she hoped they would be alright. And they wouldn't be executed. Disha was on the side of the hero's team, but would protect everyone. She herself would show everyone the true face of Aries. Rimmery reasoned that then Aries would not be able to continue his hero activities. Slad was sure of the opposite. He didn't see it as a cause for concern. In any case, that wasn't the worst of it. In fact, they could be in a worse situation. He wondered if Disha and Rimmery would have figured it out by now. Scuffles in the city taverns, thefts from aristocrats' mansions. For all of that, Aries went unpunished. After all, he is a hero. But the guards have captured him on several occasions. But that's the end of it. Aries was never sent to jail or reformatory labor. A hero was always exonerated. Aries may have been stupid, but when it came to self-preservation, he was surprisingly wise. He was well aware of what he was getting himself into, and that was why he had gotten himself a trial. What Slad didn't understand was the king's intentions. If he had simply indulged Aries' desires, he would have thrown them in prison. But instead, he provided them with quite comfortable conditions. Slad was in no position to judge anyone. That's why he didn't see the point in denigrating Aries like that. He asked Athika what she was doing at the royal castle. They had been summoned to the royal castle out of court, and he doubted she had anything to do with all the fuss with the hero's squad. When the soldiers came to their hotel, they said that if she was in his squad, she should go with them. Then Rimmery went shopping. Slad asked if she had been asked to appear in court. Ethics remembered. She was told to answer any questions that would be asked in court. Disha became alarmed when she realized she was a witness. She wasn't allowed to be here then. If they were accused of being conspirators, they wouldn't be able to testify. Rimmery noticed that the soldiers didn't stop her. And then Slad thought that since they were forbidden to communicate with her, she must be under house arrest. If they really were intent on giving her a fair trial, then maybe this time the hero would not go unpunished. The day of the trial had come. The hero's smile, more like a grin, sparkled with a crazy light. There was a tense silence in the hall. The hero's trial had begun. The ruler of the kingdom of Seawood began with the plaintiff's demands. Aries rushed forward like a predator. He claimed that the witch and the thug had left his team on a whim, and it had caused him great damage. His confirmation was enough. Aries had something to say, but the ruler demanded to step back. He summoned the holy maiden Disha next. She was the only one left on the hero's team. The judge asked if she agreed with the hero's statement. The girl stated that what the hero had said was absolutely untrue. The hero boiled with rage. The court mages used a spell of enforced silence to calm him down. Only witnesses were allowed to speak without permission. If it happened again before the spell ended, Aries would leave the courtroom immediately. His face contorted with rage, and he clenched his teeth so tightly that they seemed about to shatter. The Holy Maiden claimed that the hero was lying. However, actually 3 members of the hero's team had left her. The judge demanded an explanation of what that meant. Disha decided to tell from the beginning. She came to the point that Slud was kicked out of the team by the hero himself, and correctly explained the situation while managing to hide Slud's skills. In addition, the hero left the witch to be eaten by the wyvern, thus abandoning her in a dangerous situation. The Reamery witch left because she could no longer tolerate his behavior. The king was about to listen to Slad. The boy couldn't add anything. He was startled when the ruler addressed him so suddenly. Meanwhile, Aries looked more like a rabid animal, ready to break loose from its chain. From the outside, it was an eerie sight that sent shivers down the spine. Since the testimony of the Holy Maiden matched that of the accused, they would consider it an internal discord, and not to interfere in the matter. Consequently, the defendants were acquitted. It was too simple. The judge moved to reduce the hero's powers. Slad knew that the king's reason for the trial was something else. There was a mountain of stacks of papers on the table. The king had received complaints against the hero Aries, but he accepted only those whose contents were approved. Complaints that raised doubts or suspicions were excluded. Even so, there were an incredible number of complaints. Apparently, the time had come for Aries to confess his sins and face the truth. The hero's fate hung in the balance. The time had come, and the decision at the trial would determine his future. Aries was very calm, but it was logical, whatever charges he was facing. In the end, he was the only one who could save the world. No one could guess what the king was up to. Sherchaw was called forward. The boy stepped to the podium. The king asked if he possessed the unique skill of super memory. Sherchaw confirmed his words. He never talked about his skills. The ruler said that the hero was the only exception to the rule. He had more discretion, unlike others. He needed to see if Aries was truly worthy of being a hero. Sherchaw had heard it with his own ears. It was such a hackneyed phrase that Slad didn't remember if he had said it. Everyone, including Aries, simply ignored his words. The king stated that Aries, being a hero, had abused that freedom, failed to fulfill his duties, and behaved as he pleased. His sins simply could not be left unnoticed. All of Aries' deeds were seen by Sherchaw. The king asked if he could recreate those memories using the exposure of the court mage's lies. Cold sweat protruded on the lad's face, but he dared not cross the king's will. Slad realized something incredible. If you combine super memory with exposing lies, you would have the most powerful testimony in history. Sherchaw applied the skill of exposing lies. He should have helped document Aries' deeds in the other room later. Slad wondered why the matter had been put off for later, and why then use exposing lies at this point. The king hoped he would answer his question honestly. When he asked if super memory was a skill of his own, Sherchaw hesitated, choosing his words. He replied that it was not. When the startling secret was revealed, Slad looked at him with great surprise. The king was not going to accuse him of a crime. Sherchaw was finally confused when he was asked how he got this skill. He never thought he would have to admit it publicly. The guy stole it using his unique skill of stealing skills. The judge put his hand up in the air. Slad didn't know that Sherchaw had such an amazing trump card. He was finally starting to realize what the king was up to. The king, after thanking him for his honesty, was about to ask one last question. Could Sherchaw take away Aries' hero's skill using his own and transfer it to another person? He couldn't find the words to answer. The king just needed to know if it was possible. Sherchaw answered that it was possible. The questions were exhausted. The ruler apologized for making him remember painful moments. He then released him. Finally, a voice burst out of Aries, and he shouted for all he was worth. He wasn't going to end on such a note. The guy was agitated and wanted to explain himself. The enforced silence seemed to have ended. Until now, he couldn't utter a word. Previously, Aries was protected by his hero's skill. However, as it turned out, it could not only be taken away, but also transferred to someone else. Aries' only stronghold had collapsed. The king would have ordered him to leave the court immediately anyway, but he would listen to him this time. Aries promised he would change, so he made a strong plea to the ruler. He didn't want to lose his status as a hero. Aries bowed to the floor as he continued to speak the words of entreaty. The king believed that a person had 3 attempts to start over. But this pile of papers didn't look like 3 sheets of paper. Aries had gone too far. The best companionship he could give him, the best terms. Aries had thrown it all away, and his greatest opportunities, like a piece of trash. It was too late to apologize. The king would never forgive him. Aries rolled downward, clutching his head. He realized that it was all over from now on. Soon the king would pass judgment. The accused could consider that he spent the rest of his life in an underground dungeon. Aries cursed all those who did not appreciate his sacrifice for peace. It was unjust, he declared. The door slammed shut with a clatter, swallowing the silhouette of the madman. The trial went on longer than planned. The boys would have a 3-hour recess, including a break for food. Aries was finished. It all happened so quickly and easily. Remry rushed to be happy for Sherchaw, who should have applied this amazing skill to Aries sooner. Slad suggested not to talk about it. Sherchaw hurriedly left the room. Slad realized that the topic of skills, and especially unique skills, was a sensitive one. Sherchaw was the most sensitive about it. He clearly avoided talking about them. The witch understood that he would need to apologize to him later. But whether that later would come at all, Slad got up to look for him. It was no use, the girls thought. He wouldn't accept his support anyway. He knew, but he couldn't leave it at that. Leaving the girls in the room, he went to look for him. Slad heard the voice of the nightmare fairy calling him. He rushed after it. The voice led him to a door, and Slad froze, amazed at what he saw. Right behind that door was Sherchaw. The room was a mess, and he sat motionless with his head lowered to the floor. A travel bag was placed beside him. Could it be that Sherchaw was going to leave without even warning them? The nightmare fairy had informed him that Slad should pick it up before he lost it forever. Slud didn't have time to find out what that meant. The fairy had transported him to his comrade's dream in a hurry. The boy looked around the auditorium. Beside him, leaning on the railing, stood Sherchaw. They exchanged glances full of bewilderment. Slad inquired about what was happening here. Sherchaw called it a happiness he had ruined. Slad couldn't understand what the words meant. Sherchaw hoped that after listening to him, he could figure it out. When he was an adventurer on the old continent, he had an alias of skill thief. As the name implied, he stole skills. He took skills from bad people and used it to help others. It would be very hypocritical to do something like that again. It was just back then. Sherchaw didn't think about the fact that bad people had families too. It was a moment he would never forget. After all, the skill he stole from that person was super memory. Sherchaw didn't think he would kill himself. He just wanted to teach the unscrupulous criminal a lesson, was going to give him back his skill once he would realize his mistake. But it wasn't until after his death that Sherchaw realized. Skills are part of a person, they cannot be separated. They are something that comes naturally to him. It is very cruel to take them away. That's why he vowed that he would never use skill theft again. The king knew that Sherchaw wouldn't be able to use skill stealing. That's why he made this whole spectacle, supposedly to find out if Sherchaw could steal a hero's skill, to make Aries believe that hero status was not unshakable and could be passed on to any other worthy candidate. Sherchaw continued to send money to the family of the deceased. Though the mother could not recover, the children overcame the loss of their father and grew up to be fine people. They even had their own families now. Sherchaw was glad that Slud understood that it was not appropriate to express approval in such a situation. The broken past was over with. There was nothing good about it. Sherchaw knew it was very selfish. But he couldn't steal Aries' skills. It didn't matter to the king. He thought that revealing the existence of stealing skills was enough. Slad came to the reason why Sherchaw was going to leave. He didn't want everyone to know about the skill itself. He couldn't control himself. Slad understood his feelings. He relayed to him that Rimri wanted to apologize. Sherchaw asked him to tell her not to worry about it. Slud replied that he should tell her that himself. He couldn't let that happen. The fact that Sherchaw would no longer use skill stealing was certainly a good thing. However, his intention to leave was not entirely. If he so desired, they dared not stop him. But to leave without even listening to Rimri's apology, he would not allow him to. Sherchaw admitted that his words hit a sore spot. Slad noted that he had, after all, run away from that family, and he was afraid he hadn't earned his forgiveness. So he kept putting it off, figuring he'd apologize someday. But it was too late. Slad thought he was right. Did Sherchaw want to be forgiven? To be cursed? Whether it was easiest to help the family by saying nothing? Sherchaw stated that he would continue to run the easy way out and stay all the time alone. Slad was sure that wouldn't happen. He'd been able to keep his composure that day. When Rimri was in danger because of his plan, he was so desperate. And Slad, even when he found the hat, was as calm as a boa constrictor thanks to him. Though Sherchaw blamed himself the most and wanted to run away. He asked him not to run away anymore. Sherchaw couldn't change the past, but the present was in his hands. Sherchaw looked away embarrassed. He had noticed that Slud liked to give such wise advice, and always hit the mark. Slud thought it was very easy. He just needed to apologize for popping off without saying a word. That was unconditional. Sherchaw stood bashfully in front of the guys, not daring to raise his eyes at them. Rimri admitted that she was very upset. If he left them like that, she would never be able to get back to her life. The guy apologized. That was enough to melt her heart. Rimri also felt guilty for saying hurtful things to him. Ethics didn't want to get in their way, but she was very happy. There was a knock on the door. The boys came in with the news of today's court hearing. Opening the door, the girl found the guys having fun together. She felt awkward catching them in this position. Night shrouded the city. Today's court session was mostly devoted to solving Aries' crimes. The harassment of Ethica was also witnessed, and overall everything went smoothly. But Slud still couldn't clear up the misunderstanding when they were caught in bed. He couldn't wait to get home and get some rest. The knights were to escort Slad and his companions on the king's orders. The lad realized that he would not be able to rest today. The boys arrived at a place with a set table where the king and Disha were already waiting for them. It was strange that the king had called so many people here despite the fact that he was unaccompanied. The king asked not to worry about his safety, even if they all rushed at him at once. An unknown force seemed to envelop him from all sides. They wouldn't stand a chance. As for Slad, or rather his abilities, he had already told all of his comrades about them, except Aries. He knew the fellow was dangerous. The king's unexpected awareness raised a lot of questions among the boys. At the meeting, the king was unusually friendly. His statement made it sound as if Slad was a suspicious type. Kasif didn't deny it, but that wasn't the point. He wanted to say that Slad had a powerful skill. They could stop the formalities, which was why he had ordered the guards to leave. The boys hadn't expected such warmth. However, Disha noticed that people like them had no right to disregard politeness while talking to him. The king was surprised by the girl's seriousness. The holy maiden hinted that Slad himself had been insolent in addressing him. Kasif found it unnecessary to observe all this etiquette when he was receiving his old friend. The boys needed an explanation. Slad informed them that he and Kasif had once been teammates. He was beginning to get used to their surprised shouting. Kasif turned out to be a former adventurer who had suddenly become a king. If an elder extends his hand, one should just go along with it. Disha could not afford such liberties. Remery repeated that the king had given them the go-ahead to do so. The food prepared for the guests was incredibly delicious. Ethics continued to take care of Slade. Kasif suggested that they have a banquet and have a good time. That was his command. Amidst the raised glasses, Sherchaw and Disha were perplexed. The king was tired of dealing with all sorts of legal proceedings. This case had so many different circumstances. Slad asked him to narrate the reasons to them. They still could not see the full picture. Kasif decided to speak frankly. He asked the guests what they thought of Aries. They all had the same opinion of him. That was the main reason why a trial was necessary. He had been a notorious dictator since he was a child and dragged around every skirt. Just when it was revealed at the coming-of-age ceremony that he had the skill of a hero, there was a premonition that this was the birth of the most vile savior in history. However, the fact that he was a hero was undeniably true. First of all, there was a precedent of heroes defeating all of the Demon King's predecessors. Those were matters of the past, but the fact was unchanging. Everyone began to believe in the legend that the clerics preached. The elite of the old continent judged the same. And Kasif's compatriots, with whom they'd been through hell together, urged that in the case of a worthless hero, he should surrender and continue to simply burn the kin who turned out to be evil. He opened his mouth, but couldn't utter a word. He had no choice but to let Aries be the hero regardless of his personal opinion of him. So he gathered them up. It was an important decision. Like the king had said in court, he was proud of the kind of people he had put together in this team. At first everything was fine, but trying to gain military accomplishments. Aries was surely following the wrong path. He considered himself the strongest hero without a doubt, not even realizing it was all thanks to glory. Maybe inviting him to the team wasn't the best idea. The guys didn't think so. If it weren't for him, the hero's team would have fallen apart even faster. Kasif noticed that his comrade was as popular with the women as ever, and the same could be said for him. Ethics stated with feeling that everything would be fine as long as Slad was with them. The king figured a little half-elf would soon be born. If the two of them planned to marry, Disha would give them her blessing. Slad envisioned a quiet, peaceful life in the elven thicket. In the matter of the house, Sherchaw knew a good dwarf builder. Kasif offered to return to the conversation about forming a team. Aries had said he would not work with men. so it was mostly girls that the king had picked up, and among the guys he had only agreed on Slad as a porter. Remry was a volunteer. Her enthusiasm made her the perfect candidate, but more importantly, she had a great skill. By skill, he meant unprecedented power. It would be unfortunate if Aries abused his comrades. Kasib sought out those who were capable of opposing him. That applied to Disha as well. But there was more to the reason than that. The temple had always had strict requirements, which was why he had chosen her first. Sherchaw suspected that he was chosen because dwarves were strong in battle. The king explained that Lilicon was Aries' hobby. Slad wondered, hadn't he counted on stealing skills? His insurance did work. Then Kasib heard about their eagerness, and thought it was purely coincidental that things had worked out for the best. But on the other hand, the number of complaints grew along with their enthusiasm. The rest they already knew. Aries' decision to kick out the universally deserved porter turned into a debacle in an instant. The end was very sudden. First of all, whether he was even able to overpower a monster of a unique species. It was a very difficult task. Kashiwa's plan to let the hero overpower the Demon King ended in failure. After forming the team, the happy servants from the hero's faction were met with disappointment. All Aries brought too much trouble. The royal family members of the old continent who supported Aries were furious at his ruined reputation. The elite had read all the reports of complaints. As expected, they were eager to punish Aries, so they pounced on the counter-plan he had been mulling over since the beginning. Disha asked about it with particular excitement. The plan was to set a course to achieve a peaceful coexistence with the Demon King for the sake of saving the common people. The girls thought it was something unthinkable. But the king replied that this was the reality. There was no guarantee that the sacred power, and this time was able to defeat their enemy. The servants only talked about how this skill helped to defeat the past demon lord, who was not a unique monster. In addition, the Demon King was waging a large-scale war, having an army of uncleanness. Therefore, there was no need to kill him either. The plan was to win the battle with the army and make a peace treaty with the instigator of the war. Talking about how it would end with the hero fighting the Demon King was childish fairy tales. The boys realized that it was pointless from the start. Disha didn't understand why the hero's team was created then. She knew he had no other choice. But since he thought it was useless from the beginning, what were they all fighting for? She didn't care what people and believers said, or if Aries was even a hero. It was better to just ignore him. Kasib cited Slad as the reason for this. When he found out that Slad was on this continent, he didn't believe it. He had hoped it would be under the power of someone who had defeated the fourth unique monster, the Dragon Empress, 10 years ago. The news was met with surprise. Remry and Disha hadn't heard about it yet. The girls demanded an explanation. According to Slad, his comrades fought fiercely, and more than once were ready to say goodbye to their lives, and then they were victorious. All they needed was his presence. The king called him mad, but that was what he had hoped for. It was obvious that Aries had misjudged his strength because of him. He could defeat the Demon King by continuing to feed on these illusions. That was the plan. So the king considered himself most guilty in front of Glad. He apologized for his irresponsibility. Pity was displayed on the boys' faces. Slad understood that circumstances were different, and Kasib had done what he had to do. What was more important was that he wouldn't have met the guys if it wasn't for this plan. The king wanted to apologize, as he was tormented by remorse. In any case, thanks to the trial, the relationship with the clerics and royal family of the old continent had been strengthened. So now Aries could be officially disbarred as a hero. He had to answer for all the crimes he had committed. There was no need for the skill to be taken away in public. The king realized that he had acted badly toward Sherchaw. He too should have gradually moved forward. Sherchaw wasn't exactly in agreement with his plan for a peace treaty. However, when one saw with one's own eyes the realization of legends, making a fairy tale real was not such a pipe dream. Turning to the dead man, the guy asked for permission to use this power one more time. He was determined to master the skill of Aries. Slad stood pensively on the balcony, staring off into the distance. Ethics looked for him everywhere and finally found him. She was in an intoxicated state. The girl questioned if this was the right decision. Slad wasn't sure if it was the right decision. After all, Aries was the one who was supposed to bring peace to these lands. However, he had persuaded Kasif to let him read all the complaints they had seen at the trial, and then he knew that too many people had suffered at the hands of Aries. And yet, he had never once deigned to apologize to them. And yet, the world was forced to accept Aries just because he was a hero. The only reason why he was sent neither to prison nor to the mines lurked in just that. He was arrogant, selfish, and ungrateful. It was hard for him to say even a simple thank you. Women were just tools for him to fulfill his needs. He was indifferent to the people around him and to humanity as a whole. Soon, he would be stripped of the title of hero. Slad was looking out for everyone as always, even Aries. He asked her not to worry. There was no way he would ever forgive Aries. Aries never apologized to his comrades, or anyone for that matter. There was always profanity coming out of his mouth, and his failures were anyone's fault but his own. That was how he knew him. Slad suddenly thanked Ethica for helping him make up his mind. He decided that he would continue to be an adventurer. The guy offered to keep her company. Ethica knew nothing about the outside world before she met him. Even though she and he hadn't known each other that long, he had taught her a lot and would teach her a lot more. She realized that she was lucky to have met him. So the girl asked him to take care of her. The hands of the clock passed midnight. Slad sprawled on his bed. There was a knock on the door behind which Disha was standing. The girl asked permission to enter. She apologized to him. Disha was very remorseful. It was not clear to her where she got the confidence that she could control this monster. Slad guessed that it was because of the complaints she had read. She realized that someone like Aries had no place among the living, and she had to end him with her own hands. Then perhaps not as many people would have been hurt. Slad himself was not fully aware of how terrible things Aries had done. Even Sherchaw was in the dark. Disha couldn't know everything. But the girl felt she should have known. This temple protected the hero from punishment. He couldn't turn his back on Aries when he had praised him so long and hard. The hero's skill was a gift from the gods, and if it was given to a monster, then the gods were wrong. No church would want their god to be able to make mistakes. The gods had no such right. Disha was sure it was the temple that had covered up Aries' atrocities. It was surely the work of the skills. This temple has always been very radical. But there was an organization there willing to do anything to prove the superiority of the gods, if they were really involved. It made sense why the boys couldn't see through Aries' antics. Slad had to resort to their services one day too. But Disha, despite her role in the temple, having access to its central power, hadn't noticed these manipulations. As a saint, she was blinded only by her task of leading the hero and defeating the demon lord. Slad replied that the responsibility for Aries was not hers alone. He was at fault as well. They were comrades, but barely spoke to each other. Slad had given up too soon and stopped trying to communicate with him. Oh, and besides, you could have asked Sherchaw to keep an eye on him. Even Rimri turned a blind eye to his antics to achieve her goal. And Sherchaw couldn't strip Aries of his powers because he felt guilty for a past mistake. They were all guilty. That made a big impression on the girl. No matter how hard Slad tried, his words would not be able to rid her of her remorse. But he would always be there to support her. After all, that was his unique skill. He hoped she wouldn't worry too much. Disha swore. She tried to assure him that she would definitely carry out the reforms in the temple. There was no way she would let Slad down. The boy didn't even think about it. Disha always tried so hard and delivered her thoughts quite directly. She often threatened to hurt him, but never seriously hit him. That last one threw him into a sweat. Disha had finally found what they had been talking about in the dream. Her own desire. The path she had chosen for herself. Slad was happy for her. The scars Aries had left on this world were deep, but they would take responsibility for his sins upon themselves. Though Slad's hero had been found innocent in the trial, he would now live with that burden. Now his new adventure was beginning. Slad was minding his own business, wandering the streets of the city. His attention was caught by the crowd of people that had gathered. The hero, who had been found guilty at his trial, was being put in a cage. Aries continued to stubbornly argue that this was unfair. Among all these people, he saw a familiar face. The sludge horrified him. The madman, fueled by anger, seemed to snap off his chains, heading towards him. He clung to Slad, blaming him for all his troubles. Aries, filled with rage and pain, lashed out at the one who had ruined his life. He was ready to tear Slade apart, to wipe him from the face of the earth. He roared that they had sold him out. But the moment his fist touched Slad, reality warped. Slad found himself alone in an absolute void, where there were no sounds, no movement, only his thoughts. And then, in that stillness, he realized something. He had recently stated confidently that he would never forgive Aries. He realized that Aries was anything but a comrade to him. Aries' body began to distort under the pressure of his power. What was surprising was that he was still affected by the automatic buff. Slad lowered himself down and looked straight into his eyes. He was definitely saying goodbye to him this time. Aries was grabbed by a guard. His target changed, therefore the automatic debuff stopped. Aries wasn't just lunging at him. He was attacking everyone indiscriminately. He was no longer a hero, but a monster. The guys were waiting for Slad to return. They heard a noise outside. They were tired of waiting. He had said he would like to have some apple pie, and they made sure of it. It was their long-awaited reunion after 2 weeks. Instead of nagging each other, they decided to have a drink. The group of friends emptied their glasses to the bottom. Disha had recently returned to the temple and started training with the monks. The priests had obviously told her that it was not permissible for a holy maiden, but she had chosen her path. Rimri was invited to the royal palace, where she practiced making potions for the warriors of the front line. She was happy to be able to not only fight monsters, but also stand up to the discrimination of half-breeds. She and Athika became very close and often visited the trade shops together. Sherchaw was now working for Kashiwa, doing dirty spy work. He had a huge debt on his shoulders from the skill theft incident, so he provided various services to the king for free. The Nightmare Fairy had been flitting around the capital lately, giving sweet dreams to the children. Except that at night, she constantly came to Slad's reveries, apparently choosing them as her new abode. The former hero was sentenced to death, which was quite expected, given the number of crimes he had committed and the gravity of some, such as molesting the daughter of an aristocrat. Aries no longer had the hero's skill. Sherchaw had taken it away, and Disha was tasked with guarding him. In essence, the hero's team had come to an end. Sherchaw, Remery, Disha had lost meaning in their adventurer's life. Slad was busy gathering herbs. In this endeavor, Ithika kept him company. He involuntarily turned away when the girl pressed herself too close to him. Suddenly, she became alarmed. Ethics hurriedly climbed to higher ground. Something was happening to the sky above the city. The sensation meant one thing. The capital was in danger. Clusters of undead were forming. The city was being attacked by mobs of zombies and skeletons. A sacred barrier had been erected around the capital, but they were able to get through it. Slad took his time in confronting the monsters. Zombies and skeletons are very weak, but there were too many of them. Not 100 or a dozen hundred, but thousands of 10. He decided to entrust the undead offensive to Kasev. Suddenly, someone with special influence turned to Slad. He recognized him as a porter from the hero's team. Zelhar II was the commander of the Dead Souls squad of the Demon King's army. Undoubtedly, he was an important person. On their own, the undead certainly wouldn't be able to overcome the barrier. However, with the caster of the departed souls, the situation was drastically different. Under the influence of the forbidden skill, the undead were capable of much more. The summoning was done near the capital, so no one noticed the monsters approaching. The only thing worse than the undead was the caster who could control such a huge horde. They had witnessed the might of the rank commander of a squad of the Demon King's army. Ethics did not understand the purpose for which he controlled the dead. It turned out that Zelhar had come to the rescue, to save the hero lord from execution. In other words, he had come to help Aries. The character interested their lord immensely. An arrogant human character, a sinister soul that even the undead shunned. And most importantly, monstrous combat power. Making him a hero was a waste. Aries was far more suited for the role of one of the Demon King's army. Slad agreed with him. Aries' soul was so black that if only he wasn't a hero, he would surely be one of the leaders of the Dark Army. Zelhar was a scout. He had advised them to start running away if they still had any hope of escape, only whether it would do any good. They were facing a battle with countless enemies. If Slad had been alone, he would have been able to deal with the automatic debuff, but Ithika was nearby. Such a crowd could not be distracted by the maneuver of a provocative skill, and throwing stones at Zelhar was useless. He had to do something or Ithika would be in danger. Slad motioned for her to run. He took the enemy on himself. However, the girl was not going to leave unpunished someone who had committed too many atrocities. An unseen force rose up against the enemy. Sylph blew the undead out of the way. She and the boys went on missions for an entire month while Sleet was away. During that time, Ithika had improved her skills greatly. Certainly, she had gotten stronger. Putting the conversation aside, she turned back to the battle. It was up to Slad to start the fire. The boy had brought an enchanted flint with him very conveniently. It ignited the flames they needed. The elven maiden surprised Zelhar, except he thought it was useless. If they hadn't already noticed, he possessed the skill of a soul lord. It was the first time Slad had heard of such an ability. The enemy called it a unique skill, with which he could summon and control many times more dead than a normal soul caster. It was unfortunate for him that they were weak on their own. However, he had his trump card. From the bodies of the undead, something horrible of enormous size had formed. The golem of the departed prepared for battle. Zelhar doubted that Sylph would be able to blow the wind away from him as well. He sent the golem into the attack. The onslaught was met with a thoughtful attack. That flame carried something greater behind it, the spirit of fire, the salamander. Slad was amazed when Ethica summoned another spirit, and the sylph did not disappear. She attributed it to mastered multiple summoning. The boy realized how long he had been gone. The golem of the departed had turned into a handful of ashes. It was up to the main opponent. His face contorted into a strained, predatory smile. He stated that fire was the weakness of the undead, but in this case, it was useless. As long as he had the skill of a soul lord, they couldn't be defeated. The golem of the dead rose up. A terrifying shadow loomed over the forest. The team was involuntarily confused. Zelhar concluded that the soul lord was able to endlessly summon an army of the dead, so he could revive the golem as much as he wanted. Slad thought that was overkill. Among them, there was one whose determination did not fade even under the onslaught of circumstances. The girl decided to burn him out completely. But Zelhar only laughed, continuing to say that it was useless. His confidence fueled the fire in her, and she wasn't about to back down. Ethica realized that the one behind all of this needed to be destroyed. Killing him was risky, but she had no other choice. The enemy, as if anticipating this outcome, had prepared a trap. Just in case, he had brought an arrow charm with him. The arrow shield magically prevented material projectiles from passing through. Physical attacks wouldn't get through. Slad thought of Rimri with her long-range magic. To put a debuff on him, Zelhar's attacks would have to target Slad directly to begin with. But he hadn't ordered them to attack them. The golem, like any undead, simply hated living things, so it attacked of its own free will. If you let a golem attack you, the skill might work, but there was no point to it at all. Even if it temporarily killed the golem, Zelhar could just summon other undead. Ethica realized that she would have to settle for her power. Slad felt guilty. He regretted that his debuff was automatic, and he couldn't use it at will. However, the girl didn't blame him for that. She just needed to put more effort into it. It was then that Slad had an inkling that she had a plan. A wave of undead loomed over them. Turning to Zelhar, she identified herself as his opponent. Unlike the others, he held himself confidently without breaking a sweat. His mana wasn't running out at all. The assumption arose that he was not reviving the golem of the departed, but summoning new zombies to form into it. He couldn't be infinitely powerful. Suddenly, Slad thought about the fact that his Soul Lord skill could summon the undead endlessly, but something was clearly wrong with it. Ethica's body stopped being able to stand. She could hardly hear the voice of the spirits at all anymore. Even so, she was simply amazing. The girl thought she was just an ordinary novice who used the spirit's power without having any of her own. She believed that the spirits were able to fight the powerful army of the Demon King because Slad was with her. Ethics wished he would just listen to her. His comrades were only amazing because of him. She urged him to be proud of his strength. The girl had already played her part and wanted him to finish the scene. The opponent guessed that the guy was desperate. Right now, he was going to send both of them to the afterlife. This was the middle name of the fifth monster of a unique species, the Lord of the Dead. Slad realized he was just a liar.